By a brand new water wheel, a crowd of onlookers gasps in disbelief, because a brown-haired man grins and says this is just the start, while a young blonde woman next to a well-dressed blonde man can't stop staring, whispering, "What am I even seeing?" Meanwhile, off on her own, a red-haired girl clings to the moment with tear-filled eyes, trembling as she questions what kind of boy could possibly be causing all of this. That kid, blonde hair, blazing green eyes, clutches a book to his chest and grins like he means it, making a silent promise that this time, everything's finally going to change. It's crystal clear, once he locks onto the truth, he won't stop until he saves his family. The story snaps back to a brutal past, year 513 of the Care Calendar, where an old, eye-patch commander strides up and declares an execution has begun, Baron Solis Takar, the ex-lord of Estel territory. The commander snarls that the Baron himself approved it, and down on the platform, the young Baron can't hold himself up, his head drops in defeat, blood runs from his mouth, and the towing bells start ringing as he hears his own end coming. Pinned to a stake in the central town square, his whole body screamed with pain. Then he snapped into recognition as Reese, the mighty commander, stepped up to the mic, and terror crashed over him when he realized the speech was really his death sentence. Staring down a hostile crowd, he feels their anger bubbling like a fuse. One stone could fly any second. With a heavy heart, he swallows their resentment, convinced he has no right to blame them. His mind slips back to what life used to be. His land was once a holy paradise, bursting with life under an incredible lord, all because his parents spent 10 long years pouring their blood, sweat, and love into it. Then disaster slammed down in a brutal wave, raging floods, a brutal war, and a deadly epidemic that wiped out his family, their house steward too, while his older brother, the celebrated warrior everyone expected to rise, fell as well. He was the last one standing, a young man with nothing going for him, everyone's resentment burning in their whispers as they mocked him as an incompetent lord with zero real authority. Then the calamities never stopped. Famine crushed the people, and once they were too weak, a neighboring country slammed into them with a full-scale invasion. With defeat closing in, he saw there was only one way out. He would bargain. He offered his own life, plus the little fortune he'd saved, trading it for his people's lives and their land, and that sacrifice became his last, final act as their lord. He shut his eyes and swallowed his fate like a bitter pill, because if he had to burn, maybe his people could breathe again, maybe peace finally returned. With one last tired sigh, he struck the flames. Through the crackling roar of the flames, a voice screamed his name, Anne. She shoved through the chaos-filled crowd, her hood barely hiding a desperate, shaking face, and when he registered it, relief hit him like a wave. She'd somehow slipped out of that earlier attack without getting hurt. Her desperate sprint got snatched away. An enormous, splintered beam from the collapsing building crashed down and smashed into her with brutal force before she could even get close. In the middle of all that chaos, his voice sank into a quiet murmur of despair, and he gently scolded her, telling her she never should have done that. Fear coursed down his face as he stared at her crumpled body, shouting for her to back away from the danger. Then he looked up, bloodied but unbroken, and she thanked him for steadying her and her brother, and for giving them a chance to work in the Solis household. Sorrow hardened his expression as he stared down at the wreckage, letting her words hit him with one raw, broken line he knew it all with. With her last ounce of strength, she lunged and clamped his hand tight, tears streaming as she swore, no matter what anyone tried to say about him, she'd always known he'd protected and cared for his people with all his heart. With her hands clasped like she was sealing a final prayer, she lay among the rubble, right in front of the silent onlookers, their legs unmoving. The crowd tore open like a gate, and a noble woman with long blonde hair glided through the chaos, calm as if she owned the storm, heading straight for the scene. She froze, wearing a mournful face, and wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Then she stared straight into the tragedy unfolding in front of her. Tears poured down her face as she prayed, and a dark-haired woman joined her. Side by side, they remembered his relentless kindness, how he worked himself to the bone for his people, rode through misery and filthy conditions with them, and even gambled his life during an epidemic for his fallen territory. The young man they worshipped, bound, bruised, and doomed, stared at them from his execution spot, whispering Miss Allie, Rose Sane, Claire Sane, as if even right then he could feel it. They were still praying for him. A tired little smile flickered across his lips, and he couldn't believe it, because happiness hit him in the middle of all this chaos, and then the truth sank in. He'd never realized he was this famous, not when all these gorgeous women were paying him attention. Then his eyes snapped past them, and shock hit hard. It wasn't just the two of them. A whole crowd of his subjects had packed in, hands clasped tight as they prayed for his salvation, and he could only whisper, stunned, everyone. A blinding blast erupted around him, and he choked as smoke surged into his lungs, swallowing his sight, so he knew it was over. He shut his eyes, whispered one last silent apology, and said, "Thank you, everyone, I'm sorry, as your lord, this is all I can do, but..." As his life slipped away, a jolt of clarity hit. He'd finally met every requirement to trigger a skill, and he'd been gifted bloodline magic, space-time magic, plus a territory appraisal ability, but the timing was so weird it left him stunned. He let out a scream choked with silent rage, because a lord's power, sparked into existence by his subjects, faith to protect the land, was finally taking effect, and it did nothing. He didn't want it, didn't need it. With that last, desperate thought, his life as the least of a car ended. Then it hit him hard. A dusty historical record pinpoints Dakar's birth, the Baron Soli's family's second son, born in year 493. But when he finally realizes he's in some strange place and can't move a muscle, he spots a little arm that's his, and the nightmare snaps into focus. He's not himself at all. He's a baby. Then everything snapped back to that execution, him scrambling to trigger his bloodline magic, panic pouring through his chest. A message flashed that his authority was finally active. And with space-time magic, it stacked all his powers and knowledge into the history of Baron Solis, sealing the deal so his soul would be reborn inside that record as a brand new vessel. The truth snapped into place. Watching from his tiny, infant eyes, the shadow of his past life loomed out in the distance. He was about to be reborn, and this time, his bloodline magic would kick in from day one. He tapped his finger, staring ahead, wrestling with this wild new beginning. He gripped the heavy tome packed with his family's history, and it hit him like a storm. Everything he'd hoped for actually came true. Those prayers his people whispered at the end of their lives didn't fade away. They paid off, and they handed him a real second chance. Relief hit him so hard that his tiny, helpless body just took over. He let out a loud, undignified wail of a sound while tears poured down his face. And sure, he was mortified, but gratitude surged anyway, because at least he'd finally get to see everyone's faces again. His desperate cries met a soft touch. Before he could even process it, a woman with long blonde hair scooped him up in her arms and asked what hurt, her voice warm and calming. When he looked into her face, recognition hit like lightning. It was his mother. She flashed a smile and read his tears as pure hunger, then promised him food, right there as she pulled him close. But when he felt her in his arms, a cruel memory ripped through him. His real mother, barely 19 years old, and somehow he knew she was fated to die young, at 35, because an epidemic was waiting for her. The word food hit him like a nightmare. This tiny infant suddenly understood its real meaning, and his brain, imagining the mind of a man in his 50s, snapped back in sheer panic as he fought back inside himself, insisting, "No, this is wrong. I'm not what I look like." His silent struggle went totally unnoticed, while his mother just tilted her head and asked, sweet and gentle, if he wasn't hungry, and he desperately wanted to shout, "No, this isn't about food." His furious screams bounced off the walls and echoed across the entire family estate, the whole grounds ringing with his protest. In the end, his baby instincts dragged him under. He couldn't fight it. While he fed, a heavy, mysterious guilt crashed over him, and suddenly he had no idea why he'd been so worked up just moments ago. A thought snapped him out of his earlier, wrong inner rant. He wasn't some guy in his 50s, not at all. Then a memory slammed back. His younger self, exhausted and strapped down, executed at just 20 years old. With that gut-punch realization, a sick unease crept in, his eyes flooded with fragmented flashes. Legs planted by a desk, a file-stamped leave of absence, a cold, empty room, then a whole crowd. And as he stared with wide, stunned eyes, a crushing feeling of absence swallowed him like, what am I even looking at? His head got slammed with jumbled flashbacks, scenes from a life that wasn't his, yet felt hauntingly familiar. A man crumpled over a hospital bed in raw grief, a construction worker getting hit with devastating news on the phone, and the brutal, glass-splintering blast of a car windshield shattering. From the deep blur of his tiny mind, one sharp thought snapped into place, slicing right through the confusion. He remembered it all, every last detail, like it was his own. Those memories were Nishida Takahiro's, the exact identity he carried from the life right before this one, and he felt the man's anguish all over again. Finally thinking things were starting to go right, only for everything to get ripped away in an instant. That recovered past hit him like a wrecking ball, and fresh tears tore through him. He crumpled into sobs, haunted by the wife he'd abandoned back then, because with no kids and no relatives left, she was sitting in total loneliness. His sobs got cut off the second a soft voice slipped in, and when his new mother reached for him, she murmured to her little car, "Don't cry." She yanked him into a warm embrace and soothed him, right there beside him. He stared up at her, and as an infant's mind does, he reached for his mother's voice as he finally settled in her arms, his father's voice slipped in, warm and soft. He looked down at him and told him with a gentle smile that crying was wasting his good looks. His tiny eyes snapped open with sudden recognition, and one word slammed into his mind, "Father." Just as he finally caught a breath of peace, his older brother Derek launched in and yanked his cheeks into a playful stretch. while his dad snapped out, dead exasperated, for Derek to stop. That loud interruption did the trick. Derek turned to his baby brother with pure joy, shouting that he'd finally stopped crying. He grins wide, soaking up every ounce of warmth and love from his brand new family. He's overflowing with pure joy, because in those precious moments his mom holds him close, his dad keeps watch over them, and Derek, his older brother, plays right there by their side. Dark clouds of dread swallow his happiness, because he knows the horrible ending this family is heading toward, and one brutal question keeps echoing in his mind. Is he doomed to relive all that pain and despair again, and lose everything once more? His face hardens with pure resolve. No way is he letting that happen. He's dead set on stopping the heartbreaking fate that crushed the Baron's family in his past life. He finally realizes he's carrying two unstoppable weapons: his deep historical knowledge from life as Baron Solistakar, and his modern insights from living as Nishida, and he swears he'll rewrite fate, throwing every tool he's got at it. His authority, his time-space transfer skill, anything it takes to save his family. That drive is powered by promises he swore in his past. He flashes back to being Nishida Takahiro and vows to forge a brand new future with his wife, Yuko. Goals locked in, he gets laser-determined, picturing this brand new future. Then he admits the brutal truth. He's still a baby, so his power is only the words he can say. Still, he doesn't fold. He's sure he can cook up a real plan. Time slips by, and in the year 496 of the care calendar, Takar's already 3. His mother catches him buried in a book, and her jaw drops. He only just learned to speak, yet he's reading like a genius. She tells him she's been working hard and begs him to be a good boy, and Takar grins and agrees without hesitation. Already fluent in reading and writing, he devoured books one after another, soaking up stories so fiercely that his newfound free time made the whole world snap into sharper focus. With sharp observations, he maps out his surroundings. This world looks like medieval Europe right before the Industrial Revolution. He pins down his home, the Estel territory, a rough frontier ruled by his family, the Baron Solis. Sure, huge stretches are still untouched, but the land is enormous and bursting with life. He scanned his surroundings, and yeah, the family mansion wasn't exactly tasteful, but it still loomed in a way that screamed classic fantasy legend. In this world, magic wasn't a rumor, it was real, flaunted by the nobles, owned by the ruling class, and treated with absolute, jaw-dropping respect. The feudal lords ruled with 2 weapons, raw authority and an unbroken bloodline. The barony of Solis was handed down through sacred authority, and his very reincarnation was the direct payoff of the bloodline match. He decided to draw on Baron Solis' memories, plus what he'd learned from his other lives and every book he'd devoured. Then he stacked it all up, gathered a ton of knowledge, and started sorting it by the 5 great calamities. His face twisted at the thought, because his family had been hammered by one devastating tragedy after another, and there was nothing simple about facing that kind of history. His razor-sharp focus got ripped apart the moment his toddler's little body buckled, and he went tumbling down hard. Then he blurted out, panicked, how anyone was supposed to stay safe from the weather and outside invaders. Before he could spiral, his mother and the maids swooped in and squealed over his clumsy tumble like it was the cutest thing ever, practically melting at that tiny size. Even with those interruptions flying at him, he knew he had to spy on the neighboring empire, starting with the flood that hit in 501, then the Estel territory invasion led by the so-called invincible general, Weiss, a man almost no one really understood. And with only 5 years left, he had to whip up a plan. 2 years vanished in the blink of an eye. Now Takara was 5, and panic hit like a punch. He once believed he had time, but 5 years had already swallowed him whole in his new life. Trapped by towering stacks of books, nausea crashed over him, and he knew he had to rein it in, breathe, steady himself, and make sense of it all. Then he glanced at the date again. The care calendar still screamed 498. He kept digging through history, tearing into old records night after night. Right there, it spelled out a huge harvest in 498 that somehow wrecked the territory anyway by slamming grain prices. Then a brutal crop failure hit, and after that the fights with neighboring lords just kept snowballing. The records painted a bleak, relentless nightmare, disasters piling up year after year. A surplus harvest in 499, a volcanic eruption that scorched the skies and sparked drought in 500, a brutal fight against neighboring lords in 501 that cost his older brother his life, a crushing war against an invading country in 502, and then in 503, a flood so devastating it felt like the world snapped in half, and with crisis after crisis flooding the page, he slammed the book shut. Furious, demanding how anyone in their right mind could have believed they had even a second to spare. His wild outburst snapped into cold, grim analysis. He laid out the next horrors like a checklist from his past life. a bountiful harvest gone wrong, a harvest failure, a fight over land, the wreckage of war, and then the flood at the end. And he realized the brutal truth. If he tried to brace for all five at once, his resources would be wiped out long before that final, crushing flood ever showed up. Realizing he couldn't fix everything, he clenched his will and decided to handle what he could reach right now, then marched up to his mother at her desk, interrupting her with an apology, quill and all, and asked what he needed. She shoved her work aside, dropped to her knees in front of him, and lit up with the kind of joy that said, "I've got you." He watched her slip into that razor-focused, no-nonsense mindset for her duties, nothing like the person he was used to, yet somehow even more impressive. Then he clasped his hands and started laying out the favor he needed to ask. He told her his project just wasn't taking off the way he'd dreamed, and after hearing about the incredible craftsmen in Estel, he wanted to meet them face to face, while his mother just beamed at him with a sweet, encouraging smile, saying how cute her son was. He pushed his case hard, formally begging for permission to slip out of the estate and tour the workshops, and even though shame stung him for having to play the game, he had one goal in sight: stop the future from crashing down on everyone. Relief hit him hard. His mother agreed without hesitation, telling him to hand the preparations over to her. A few days later, he finally got the go-ahead, but with two strict conditions. His father loomed beside her, barking that he had to act like a proper noble, and the boy snapped back that he would. Right when the second condition hit, a hooded maid burst toward him at full speed, shouting his name like it was burning, wide-eyed and insisting she knew everything. The maid was Anne, and she was assigned to escort him. She stood right in front of him, fingers clasped in perfect composure, her face set with unshakable resolve. In Est, the biggest city in the Estel territory, way down in the southern reaches of the Care Kingdom, thousands have spilled into the streets, and right in the middle of it all, inside the towering walls, a huge crowd surges around the central plaza near the Lord's mansion where Cyrus Dakar lives. There, a young Cyrus, with his maid at his side, leans forward and stares out over the chaos, eyes blazing with excitement. As they strode through the buzzing market, Cyrus shook his head and said the town feels better this way. This city is the region's supply chain starting point, and its prosperity is forged from mining, trade, and farming. Their eyes lock onto a food stall where gigantic sausages sizzle on the grill, and Cyrus blurts out that they look insanely good, while drool threatens to spill as he leans toward Carson and calls him out. He whips his gaze to his silent companion, clocking her reaction, then asks what's wrong, and even pulls her in to grab a bite with him. Deep down, the virus swears Nishida's commoner blood from his past life is nothing but pure excitement, and it all spikes at the thought that he used to be a legendary eater, while the elderly couple running the stall spot the Baron's young master, who just happens to love their food, and immediately treat it like the biggest selling point they've ever had. He rushes in to apologize for catching them off guard, then says it's time to go, and as soon as they step away, a crowd explodes around the stall, customers scrambling to snatch up everything the young master offered. Cyrus can't shake the awkward feeling, then it hits him. She's the head maid's daughter from the Soli's house. Her thoughts slip deeper into her past. She'd been trained like a weapon from childhood, taught the way of a proper maid early on, and she was insanely skilled in martial arts too. Even her father, a commander in the standing army, hammered self-defense into her so hard that no regular soldier could survive a sword fight against her. She served as both his maid and his bodyguard, and she was flawless. Just the other day, at 15, she leveled up from apprentice to his personal maid. Now, as he watches her in the present, a cold memory crashes in. This very plaza is where he last saw her, right before his execution in his second life. He digs deeper into that old past, remembering how he'd started out as Derek's personal maid and bodyguard, always watching the two of them spar in the courtyard, both razor-sharp with swordsmanship, until 3 years later, when Derek's life is cut short on the Cross of Trail, and Cyrus is left to step in and serve him only after his brother's death. He replayed it all in his head, how, by the time he hit 30, she had already stepped into her mother's role as head, right after her own mother died of the very same cause as the one she'd served. 2 losses crushed her back to back, and after she lost the second, despair swallowed her whole. Her voice yanked him out of his spiraling thoughts, and she asked straight up what was wrong. He jerked in surprise, waved it off with a quick shout that it was nothing, then told her they had to go. She only nodded like she understood. As they kept moving, his eyes locked onto her. There stood the dignified, quiet, and breathtaking red-haired maid right at his side. He finally admitted to himself that things had gone sideways from the start, back when she first started serving him. Every time he slipped up like a true disgrace to a noble, she'd cut him down with a calm voice and a razor-sharp tongue, and he still couldn't explain why that tension stuck so hard. He remembered her telling him that even if he didn't play the noble role perfectly, the people of the territory still smiled at him, because he was so easy to talk to. After his own shameful behavior, he finally clocked what he'd been calling her, Ice Lady, and he quietly apologized for the nickname with nothing but silence. She trusted her sure, but the vibe still made him nervous. So at the workshop, he decided to play it perfectly, like he was on his best behavior, convinced his parents would have agreed, especially if they were watching. When they finally arrived, workshop manager Geld was waiting. This huge, muscular brute stood there with his arms crossed, and he snapped that this place was absolutely no hangout for a noble family's young master. Cyrus looked up at that intimidating wall of a man and froze. Cyrus didn't let the manager's hard stare scare him off. He grinned, introduced himself as Cyrus, and said he was there to learn, not to start trouble. Geld looked thrown off, then huffed and relented, letting them roam as long as they didn't cause a scene, and later Cyrus figured Geld probably only listened because his wife ran the house. The moment they crossed the threshold, a brutal crack of breaking wood snapped through the air. Then a craftsman erupted, screaming at an apprentice to redo it, yelling that the work was unfit for any customer. Cyrus and Anne both froze, startled by the sudden blast of rage. He waved off his own worries about the tense workshop with a bright grin, telling her it was totally fine, while his maid just stared in confusion, because deep down, he knew that hostile air couldn't touch him at all. That cool, unbothered vibe came straight from his old life, back in the toxic company where the air practically stank with pressure. He could still hear some manager barking that the answer was always yes, and yeah, it wasn't a memory he liked, but he'd gotten used to it. The very next day, Geld, the workshop manager, waited and stared as Cyrus came back, and the shock hit him hard. The kid wasn't scared at all. Geld's mind raced, wondering what kind of young master could stand there, completely unfazed, in a workshop that usually terrifies everyone. Cyrus was shocked the kid had returned, because that meant he'd finally won permission from his tough guardian, and while Cyrus stared at her, she crossed his mind as the Ice Lady, cold as she looked, but he understood that her icy attitude was just how she shielded him. Across the workshop, the senior craftsman snapped at his blindfolded apprentice, growling that the moment wasn't meant for interruptions, but he wasn't quitting on the work. Cyrus shrugged off the outburst and strode up to the senior craftsman, asking which timber was the hardwood, but the man didn't even look up, hands stuck in his work, snapping that Cyrus would have to wait. While the craftsman dodged the question, his apprentice strode by and snapped, reminding him the delivery date was looming, and demanding to know what they were going to do next. Geld kept his eyes on the tense exchange from afar. Geld's face shifted from worry to deep thought as he watched Cyrus work the room with his men, and a sudden realization flared in his eyes. Just when Cyrus thought he'd lost the moment, the older craftsman finally snapped his focus back, calling him young master, and Cyrus shot back, yes. Right when the craftsman started to move on, Geld stepped up, eyes locked on the boy, and demanded straight out, was Cyrus interested in woodworking? Cyrus snapped his fist shut, knowing he had to play along, but that direct pressure forced a real, serious answer. He makes it crystal clear, this isn't just idle curiosity. Something inside him is forcing him to build it, no matter what stands in his way, and if he fails, he'll never reach them. Gel press, yeah, that's next. He asks straight up if what he's trying to create can only be brought to life through woodwork with. The boy shoots back one bold, unstoppable answer, yes. The moment he answers, he snaps up the Geldorf guard, and his face instantly flips to pure, jaw-dropping surprise. Right after that, the workshop manager takes in the boy's conviction, nods once, and just says, I see. And from that day on, Cyrus starts showing up at the workshop almost every single day, until his presence becomes a permanent part of the place. With every visit, he slowly forged a real connection with the man he now called boss. Cyrus would beam with youthful energy, swearing he wouldn't butt into the work, while Gel would scowl and toughly nod as the young. He also clicked with the other craftsmen who treated him kindly, and even though his real mental age made things feel a little awkward, he finally took the leap and showed them the project he'd been imagining. He unfolded his plan and shoved it in front of Geld, and the second Geld saw it, his face twisted with pure confusion. He just stared at the paper, totally stunned, and demanded what on earth it was supposed to be. Even the other craftsmen were stumped. One demanded how they were supposed to carve a perfect round shape like the picture, while the next guy worried they didn't have any wood tough enough to withstand rot for a job like that. Cyrus watched their faces twist, and he couldn't deny it. His own attempt had flopped hard, so he'd brought the design to them in the first place. After weighing the challenge, Gel snapped for a craftsman, Carl, and told Cyrus, the kid's young, but he's got real promise, and Carl will be useful. Then the dark-haired craftsman stepped up, reached out, and introduced himself to young Master Dakar like it was a ceremony. He gripped the young master's hand hard and sealed their deal on the spot. Then Cyrus turned and left, while his parents stood in the doorway watching. His mother pointed out how he never usually asked for anything, and his father just smiled like, let him run the show, especially since he'd been dropping by the workshop nonstop lately. And the work kicked off for real, 3 solid months, and Cyrus never left the workshop, teaming up with Carl step by step. They kept sharpening every detail until their creation was finally done, so intricate it couldn't possibly be brushed off as some kid's toy. A few days later, the chance finally showed up. Cyrus had to unveil the completed model to everyone out in the courtyard. His chest tightened as he cleared his throat and started thanking his parents, but the words died on his tongue because someone else was there. A man he absolutely didn't expect to see. He froze, staring at the surprise visitor, the man standing right beside his parents, and with a polite nod, he asked the Karsama for permission to hear the proposal and join in. Cyrus clocked him the instant he appeared. Raymond, the house steward running the estate's every detail, one of the finest men in the household, only behind Cyrus' parents. He'd even served Cyrus, mother before she was married, and the proof of his skill was everywhere. Yet somehow Cyrus couldn't stand him, because the moment Raymond stepped into his space, a suffocating pressure slammed into his chest. He remembered his old life, how he'd pitch ideas to his parents, only for Raymond to nitpick them again and again. Every time that happened, Cyrus couldn't ever hit the right answer, and it felt like his chest would split open. Sure, Raymond eventually swallowed his pride, approved his plans, and started running his suggestions in the household, but every victory left him drained to the bone. Even while his own feelings fought him, Cyrus had to concede it. Raymond was solid, sharp, and he actually listened to his master's every order. He had that crowd-pleaser vibe, down to the mole under his eye and the maids. They adored him so much that Cyrus couldn't remember ever getting that kind of spotlight himself. He slumped over and groaned through clenched teeth, then caught himself wondering if his hatred for the steward was really just jealousy, because everyone else seemed to love him. But when he locked eyes with the man, he shoved those feelings down hard. Yeah, he felt that sting of inferiority. Still, he knew, no doubt at all, that Raymond was someone he could trust, because in the end, it was what was inside that mattered. With his mind made up, he faced the group and declared he'd kick things off. Then he said he'd call Foreign. From the side, Foreign snapped an immediate yes, already geared up to jump in and help. He sweeps his arm wide at the tangled gears and levers, kicking off his presentation with full showmanship, and as he talks, his eyes lock in, because the stakes hit him hard, and he knows that if he wants to bend history, he needs Raymond fighting right beside him. This hits him like a spark. Pure resolve ignites in his chest. He won't just show his project. He'll win the steward over, turn him into an ally, right from this very moment. The maid and the young master, ever since he was little, he'd stared at her with a jittery, scared caution, like he couldn't decide if she was danger or fate. Even the way he talked felt off, like he was deliberately fumbling on purpose, putting on a clumsy act that never once felt charming. Strangely enough, no matter what, he always clicked with everyone, turning the folks in town, and even the sharp, skilled merchants who came to the mansion for business into loyal allies. Curiosity about him kept growing, so she made a bold swap. She assigned that apprentice she'd originally planned for her eldest son, Derek, to Takar instead, and ordered the apprentice to send her daily reports on the young master's every move. Meanwhile, Steward Raymond watched from his window as Takar rolled out an invention he'd never even imagined, then took personal charge of building it right in front of his eyes, and calling it unusual would be a massive understatement. His eyes snapped sharper, and a wild realization hit. Whatever they were forging down there could save the entire territory. In the workshop, Takar stood over the huge wooden and metal contraption as it knelt, carefully checking every component. Takar's finished invention got slammed onto the table in front of his parents, and his father just froze, staring at the sheer size like he couldn't believe his eyes. Then he blurted, "What is this?" His mother, right there beside him, could only gasp one word: amazing. Caught by his mother's silent question, Takar grinned like he'd just struck gold. He said he'd built 2 devices. He pointed and declared one was a lifting water wheel, while the other powered the whole setup, and his mom leaned in, repeating water wheel with wide-eyed curiosity. He kicked things off by breaking down the lifting water wheel, an enormous wheel packed with neat rows of rectangular buckets that scooped up water and carried it upward. While Takara kept up his demonstration, he broke down the mechanics in plain, electrifying detail. He pushed the wheel into the current, and the flow made it spin. As it turned, it scooped water upward and sent it pouring from a point farther and higher than where it started. And then, his mother leaned in, listening hard, nodding like every word clicked. It breaks down the powering water wheel like the others. Water flow spins it, just the same. And then a rod tied to its axis starts bobbing up and down, while a side gear bites a gear on the ground, turning that wheel spin into smooth horizontal movement. His mother is completely blown away, stuck on how anyone could even handle a child this incredible, while his father looks utterly baffled like he's watching some kind of science experiment come to life. Meanwhile, the steward, Raymond, quietly watches and thinks, "Oh, she spoils Cyrus way too much," and his father's got that old-fashioned mindset. Then with one last burst of conviction, he makes it crystal clear. This isn't just a wheel, it's a lifting water wheel, built to shove water up to a higher level than the river ever reaches on its own. It hits his mother like a lightning bolt, realizing that this device could finally send water to those dead, barren lands that have been stuck out of reach for lack of access. He keeps right on with the demonstration, breaking down how the water wheel's power can be tweaked to automate the brutal chores that used to be done by hand, until his parents and the steward finally get it. This isn't just some kid's toy anymore. The invention hits like a warning flare, because the Estel territory's food supply is stacked in one easy target, with all the granaries packed into a single spot. Boost production and automation, and the whole economy surges. But if that one area gets wiped out, the fallout would be catastrophic and impossible to measure. This hits Raymond the steward like a punch. Cyrus already seems to know one of the territory's biggest problems, and Raymond can't take it. He leans in and demands to know where Cyrus learned it. Cyrus just grins and says he picked it up from a book about other kingdoms. He keeps going, saying he believes this can boost their own territory's growth, and that heartfelt vow hits Raymond so hard that a tear finally wells up as he stares at the boy. Raymond's view of the boy flips in an instant. This isn't some childish curiosity or a dare for fun. Cyrus seems to know the dangers waiting for them, and he's doing everything in his power to steer clear of every single one. Turns out, while everyone else stays in the dark, young Takar is shouldering a brutal, hidden burden, and the dance makes it look plain as day. Steward Raymond clung to his resolve, reminding himself that Cyrus was still just a kid. There were limits to what he could pull off by himself. He knew there'd be moments when other adults would dismiss him on sight. So when that happened, Raymond made a vow. He'd back the young master from the shadows. The moment he started to speak, Cyrus spun toward him, shock flashing across his face, and demanded to know what was really going on. He hesitated for a beat, then, boom, relief lit up his face with a bright smile, and he thanked Raymond like crazy. Cyrus then snapped that they were going full steam ahead, while still grilling the safety details and cranking up production, because he realized they were about to get slammed with work. Raymond just smiled back and let out a quiet yes, sealing his agreement to Karsama with nothing but that one simple nod. Backed by Raymond Strong, the whole plan exploded into motion. Within days, they were already tearing into the inspection of the installation site, and the very next day they kicked it off for real. Before long, an enormous order for water wheels hit the workshop, and just a few months later, deliveries started rolling in non-stop. Now the whole family had thrown in. His mom and Raymond were knee-deep in building the land and irrigation plans. His dad was hustling to sell the surplus before the chance slipped away, and even his little sister was jumping in, scribbling and sorting through the paperwork like a spark plug. He watched those efforts launch like an arrow from a bowstring, an arrow that could rewrite history, and with that rush still pounding in him, he hardened his resolve, sure they'd beat the 5 calamities he'd already seen coming. Time dragged on until the grand harvest finally arrived. Then Cyrus sat at a lavish table, locked in on his food like it was his fate, jaw set with ruthless determination, because in his mind there was zero chance he'd lose. With a thunderous shout, he shoveled food down his throat and declared he'd never be beaten by some mere family. Right after Cyrus gave his water well presentation, land development and irrigation projects exploded into action, and then the harvest finally started to pay off. Milling facilities to power that water well were underway too, but Cyrus snapped back to one last, make-or-break job before any of that success could truly be secured. He realized Barney's massive harvest, what sent grain prices crashing, was his chance of a lifetime, so he didn't just brace for the next bad harvest. He hoarded like crazy, stacking supplies and building a money cushion, buying low now so he could sell high later and survive the disasters he could already feel coming. To pull that off, he needed a rock-solid excuse to buy that huge stash of wheat, and he knew he'd have to launch a brand new product in the market. It was wheat-based dried noodles, preserved food, made so it could sit for ages and be cooked in minutes with nothing but hot water. Fueled by that thought, he hurried straight into the kitchen of the Baron Soli's house, slipped around the corner, and beamed at the head chef, Miguel San. The big, muscular man snapped his attention away from the pot, already stirring it, then grunted a greeting and asked if the boy was back again. Miguel used to be a soldier who fought right beside Cyrus' father, and even when the battlefield ran dry on ingredients, he still cooked up mouth-watering meals like it was magic, until a wound forced him to accept the Baron's request and step into the role of head chef. The chef clicked perfectly with the Baron and spoiled Cyrus with kindness, then leaned in and asked what the boy wanted today, so Cyrus explained he was trying to save something, unveiling his prototype noodles. Miguel snatched one and immediately nailed it, shouting that the noodles were made from water, flour, and salt, kneaded, rolled, and dried exactly right. Cyrus smiled and confirmed it, saying they needed to do this because a huge pile of wheat flour was about to show up soon. With one single noodle pinched between his fingers, Cyrus' face went stone serious, and he said, if this trick actually worked, it could even matter on the battlefield. Miguel's eyes snapped open at that idea, and the ex-soldier's gaze sharpened instantly at the danger hidden in the implication. That strategic thinking was born from a brutal lesson. At just 5 years old, Cyrus realized knowing the past and future tech wasn't enough to trigger real change, because he couldn't build a water wheel by himself, so he chose to bend history only through the help of skilled professionals. With Miguel beside him, Cyrus plunged into weeks of brutal experiments, testing every trick, tweaking the salt, swapping drying methods again and again. And thanks to his father's warning about waste, he had to chomp through every failed batch even when it ruined his day. But after endless tries, he finally hit the right one, took a bite, and his face lit up like he'd just won. Yeah, it was good. He nailed the recipe just before the great harvest, and pure relief and victory hit him hard as he quietly thanked Miguel for all the help that mattered. He sat down with his family, staring at his brand new creation like it was about to blow their minds, and when the noodles finally won everyone over, he felt a chill. Something was off. The seasoning was missing, and in this landlocked kingdom, soup stock ingredients were hard to find, with soy sauce and miso nowhere to be seen. As he wrestled with the problem, even his younger sister, his mother, and his father leaned in, practically buzzing with excitement to taste whatever he'd come up with next. Their simple requests lit a spark in his mind. He knew he had to add one more key ingredient, a selling point so irresistible it would finally hook his father's attention, and then bam, an idea flashed across him with it. With fresh determination blazing in his eyes, he snapped into action, grabbed his tools, and started building, ready to slam his next idea into reality. The solution was a brand new product, cup noodles packed in a bamboo container, thanks to the fact that bamboo was easy to get. Just south of the Estel territory, right where it kissed the demon realm at the border, a huge bamboo forest spread wild. People feared its fast growth would feed monster habitats, so they hacked it back on a regular basis, leaving demand low and supply overflowing. That creepy reputation made bamboo the ultimate unnoticed treasure for cooking and storage alike. He sliced a bamboo stalk, hollowed it out, stuffed it with dried noodles, then poured in water and Miguel's secret seasonings. After that, he set it over the fire and watched it simmer into a fragrant, mouth-watering soup, and the whole idea made him think of pulling a lucky paper fortune. But even after nailing the cup noodles, frustration crushed him. He ranted about one careless slip that forced him to drag Miguel in, even though his plan was flawless in every other way. He scanned the rows of finished bamboo cups, and confidence roared back into him. This was his selling point. Now he'd bring these omikaji dried noodles to his father as a brand new product and a stash for emergencies, and he was sure Dad would be blown away. He grabbed one to admire it, then a weird clatter burst from inside. Something was definitely wrong. Mold had taken over everything, and the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. That freshly cut green bamboo was soaking wet. Dried bamboo would have held the noodles perfectly, but getting it wasn't easy or cheap, and he had grabbed the green kind way too easily. For months he clung to that crushing disappointment, racking his brain for a fix that felt totally impossible, so bad he even wished for something absurd, like styrofoam dropping from the sky. Then the year of the great harvest finally rolled in, and with it came the start of the prophesied 5 calamities. Out in the fields, the wheat shot up tall and golden beneath a cloudless sky, and the local farmers, completely blind to what was coming, stared at that golden bounty and swore autumn was going to be amazing, already salivating for a glorious harvest. They crouched over a wheat stalk, its heavy head weighed down with grain, yet coated in a fine, dark dust, like the plant had been buried by something deadly. The older farmer swore it was volcanic ash from Braphonia, and his companion could only hope this wouldn't turn into something worse. From the window, a 6-year-old kid stared at the same ash drifting down onto the street, his little hand pressed hard to the glass as dread crawled into his bones. He'd been waiting for this moment to blow open the streets, an asphalt ashfield born from a volcanic eruption in the nearby Graphonia Empire. Anne burst in and told him the proposal meeting was almost here, cutting right through his plans. He thanked her, already locked in on using the asphalt as his opening, convinced that his panic was what would fuel the whole operation. Then, leaning on Barney's history, he insisted the asphalt wouldn't hold up for long or cause any direct damage. Even the old records warned of a brutal rhythm. This year's massive, unheard-of harvest would be followed by an equally shocking famine next year. Locked in a meeting with his father and Raymond, the Baron laid out their plan: mass-produce wheat flour and perfect portable preserved food, because the poor harvest could ruin everything unless they held on long enough to face what's coming next. In the politics, it was a powder keg. The Solis Barnes boom had already drawn the nasty attention of the nearby Gorman and Hirami viscounties, so help wasn't coming. The young lord finally understood the crushing truth. He'd have to face the bad harvest by himself. The only neighbor who'd normally help, the Forna barony, was locked in a brutal war with Graphonia down south, so there was no support coming. He stormed into the Solis barony's assembly room, a fresh bead of sweat sliding down his temple, because the weight of what came next crushed the air as he stood before the council. Compared to his waterwheel presentation, the air around him felt way more terrifying. Then it hit like a punch. He was only 6, yet he already had a voice in the territory's affairs. He knew Barony's sudden wealth hadn't come out of nowhere. It was built from scratch by his parents' backbreaking work. When his father first got the land, it was nothing but rough, undeveloped territory, dotted with just a few tiny villages and no specialized fields to speak of. Cyrus stared at the thought of his parents, because their powers built the Solis barony's fortune from the ground up. His father, a spacetime mage, could shove massive amounts of supplies into spatial storage, while his mother, an earth mage, could read land like a map and turn it into wealth no one else could match. And when they teamed up, they started a relentless money machine. She hunted down farmland and mines, and he used trade to stack their assets higher and higher, until their territory outshined even the higher-ranking viscounties. He strode up to his father, grinning as he praised the massive harvest, so good it made every one of their subjects cheer, and while he smiled on the outside, the young heir's mind was racing. Could those incredible people, who'd built up the whole territory in one generation, actually say yes to his proposal? Baron was already panicking, clutching his head, because the exact mess Cyrus was about to tackle was staring him in the face. A huge harvest was supposed to be a win, but it turned into a trap. Cyrus broke down the economic truth. Farmers paid taxes with their grain, saved seeds and food for next year, and sold what was left. The catch, here taxes were based on land size, not how much you reaped, so when the fields flooded with grain, everyone's share climbed. Then the market got swamped, prices crashed, and their earnings fell right along with them. Right after the problem hit, Cyrus stepped up and formally unveiled his document, declaring this huge harvest could be a blessing and that his plan would tackle the mess that comes with too much. He pitched it as a chance to tap the Estel territory's power and set up defenses for whatever disasters might come next. That got his father, the Baron, leaning in demanding Cyrus break down the 3 things he wanted to propose, while the steward just stood there, listening like every word mattered. He kicked things off with his first pitch, aiming it straight at a dark-haired woman, telling her grain prices were finally falling, so this was the perfect moment to buy grain, churn out dried noodles, and stockpile preserved food, plus push them for use on the battlefield too. She grabbed a container of those noodles and showed him the label, clearly stamped as still underdeveloped. Cyrus knew his mother might hesitate, so he hammered in the key point. This move wouldn't just matter, it would also bring work to farmers whose incomes had taken a hit, creating jobs for them. He caught their approval and realized they'd probably already wrestled with this problem themselves, so he clenched his resolve and pushed on to his next point. Then he burst into his second plan, an ever-normal granary, so when the harvest was plentiful, they'd stash the extra grain to survive the lean times ahead. He pitched a system where farmers would dump their extra grain into that ever-normal granary for the same steady, usual price. Then the barony would deal with any leftovers, so the streets wouldn't get flooded with grain, prices wouldn't crash, and farmers' earnings stayed safe. When Cyrus wrapped up his explanation, Raymond the steward couldn't stop himself. He praised Cyrus's clever idea, and Cyrus drove it home. This system would keep farmers' earnings steady like the past years, while any extra grain would get stored for free, with 0 added cost. Cyrus' father, the Baron, snapped his gaze off the window and thanked Raymond for helping him, admitting the idea of winning the people's loyalty wasn't such a bad plan after all, while Cyrus in the back of his mind was already throwing a mental victory party for pulling it off. Then he leaned in and declared it, his third and final proposal, right at the heart of everything. His family leaned in as he broke down his wild theory, when he said he'd backed with a stack of books, that a tiny patch of asphalt could be the first warning sign of a massive volcanic eruption. Baron dismissed it as a gloomy fantasy, but Cyrus leaned in and warned that a massive eruption across the border would slam their own crop fields, no question, so he pitched it as a chance to buy grain cheap and stash it up for a coming price surge, even as he silently admitted his sure thing was a long shot, because he couldn't ever confess he knew the future, only that the odds were stacked in his favor. He admitted he'd been scared of this for years, convinced his premonitions had to mean something, because he couldn't find any other reason. Even if the harvest failed to come up short, he argued, selling their preserved food would still throw their territory straight into the heart of the industry. With pure conviction burning in his chest, he started pleading about. He bowed to the council so deeply it looked like he'd sink through the floor, then threw his last, desperate plea at them, begging them to finally believe him. A soft voice shattered the tense silence and called out his name, Takar. A soft footstep echoed through the room as she crept closer. She yanked him into a tight embrace, her voice brimming with love and pure exasperation. "Geez, you really are," she snapped, gripping her son even harder. Stunned, Cyrus could only stammer, "Mother," and with a soft, calming smile, she reassured him that she could see the effort he'd poured into it, promising they'd deface whatever was coming together. She yanks her son close and crushes him in a warm, tight hug. Just as things get soft and heartfelt, Cyrus, father, strolls in with a confident grin, and Bam kills the moment by saying their plans for the afternoon are off, so they should wrap it up. Standing shoulder to shoulder with his father, Cyrus can't help but feel it. He's finally nailed what true filial piety looks like, and that pride hits like a victory. This win rips him open and drags up a tidal wave of brutal memories from his old life, everything he failed to do, every time he bolted and called it escape until there was no way back. He writhes, trying to find the real reason. Was it because he felt smaller than his amazing family, or because he was just terrified to put his best effort on the line? He grips his shirt, crushed by the truth that even after taking everything from them, he never once managed to give anything back, and now he's blown his only chance to see them again. And that's when it hits. Nishida Takahiro's life wasn't any different. He digs deeper into his past. Nishida Takahiro, just some forgettable salaryman in Japan. He still flinches at the memories of getting bullied as a kid, always chasing approval like it was air. His coworker ripped away the credit from all his hard work, and every time he tried to speak up, his voice died inside him, so success slipped farther and farther out of reach. Then came the years of isolation. A middle-aged recluse stuck at home. When he finally gets fired, his 20-year-old wife, Yuko, steps up and starts working to keep them afloat, cheering him on, pushing him forward. "One day you'll be amazing," she insists, and he keeps leaning on that kindness, gambling his future on a shaky job and a leap of faith. The memory turns black, and all he can do is curse himself when she finally wakes from her coma. Watching her stare at him with that crushing worry breaks him in half. At almost 50 years old, he finally clenched his determination and decided it was time to move forward. Then fate snapped. He crumpled first, and his wife was left standing there alone. This cycle of failure keeps clawing at him, night after night. He's terrified to take that first step, always fleeing instead of standing his ground, and when he finally forces himself to look ahead, it's already too late. He stood there by himself, swallowed by the shadows of everything that came before, and inside his chest lived the crushing weight of 2 lives worth of regret, his own and Yuko's, and the brutal, shared hope that they could still rewrite what happens next. That hit so hard it snapped his resolve into place. He knew he could change, and he'd do it step by step, no shortcuts. With his determination locked in, the world kept rolling forward. Autumn had arrived in the care calendar's 499th year, and harvest was sprinting toward them. Across the land, golden wheat fields stretched for miles, swaying like they were breathing with the breeze. In the care calendar, year 499, the great harvest finally thundered in, and the wheat here ripened just a little later than it did in Cyrus' previous world. At first, the farmers went wild with joy over an absurdly huge yield. But that first burst of joy didn't last. Concerned voices started warning that market prices were inevitably about to crash. Raymond and Cyrus' mother stepped in fast. She ordered the building of ever-normal granaries, stacking them one after another to soothe the angry peasants. Cyrus smiled because they actually believed him, and they even started getting ready for his plan, whether they were already thinking of it or not. With all those plans finally set, the inevitable hit. Soon the price of grain crashed, exactly like the history of the barony of Solis swore it would. With the market reeling from the crash, Cyrus's father jumped into action, snapping up grain at prices higher than everyone else, slamming in bigger water wheels to churn out dried noodles, and hiring farmers who'd been hit hard, while the preserved food production line kept rolling like a machine. At first he doubted everything, until the second block of asphalt hit the ground, and suddenly he knew this was the perfect opportunity, so he went all in and swore, "My time is here." That sudden spark of ambition didn't stay hidden for long. Cyrus and his sister were tucked behind the door, watching their father in a rare good mood. Cyrus swore he'd been sprinting around with a gleam in his eyes ever since the market crash, because this was exactly where spatial storage magic really flexed. Cyrus quickly cracked his father's master plan. Sure, it looked like he was just buying wheat for the local market, but underneath, he was sweeping up cheap grain from other territories, masking the Solis' barren name as he did it. And it hit Cyrus. His father was already setting everything up to ship those preserved supplies straight to the capital's knights, and the way he pulled it off was both spotless and merciless. One day, Dad's good mood practically burst through the walls, so he yanked Cyrus into his office and promised, if their wheat and preserved food profits went up, Cyrus' allowance would jump by 10%. Playing innocent like a kid, Cyrus lit up and blurted that it was real, and swore he'd treat it like a promise. but Ernest's sudden, bold display caught his father so off guard that he couldn't even finish the sentence. He just froze, stunned, after all that planning. His father snapped himself back under control and said that only a certain kind of person could get cheerful, just because grain prices were dropping. And then he added that lords naturally wear a different face on the outside. Cyrus still couldn't shake the worry and pushed, "But is it really okay?" The Baron bowed so low he could barely be seen and asked to be excused. He insists that letting his other son keep slipping out of the city is for the territory's best interest, and while his father weighs it all over, young Cyrus overhears, going outside, and the idea hits him like a spark. The thought clicks into place like a switch. He's locked on a plan, and he realizes this is the perfect shot to build up his third era. He barrels straight to his parents and their steward, begging to tag along on an on-site inspection of the granaries, only for his mother to stare in shock, insisting it's no safe or suitable trip for a lord's 6-year-old son. He begs them, swearing he really needs to go, and when his father demands a reason, Cyrus lays out his logic. Since he pushed for the ever-normal granary, he has to see firsthand how that policy is landing on real people. He makes it sound like the make-or-break lesson for running the territory's internal affairs, and the perfect way to prepare to help his older brother later. Raymond's father sits him down and bluntly tells him the truth. No excuse changes it. What they're doing is still just feeding on the farmer's fear. Then the steward presses harder, demanding to know why they have to make this visit right now. Cyrus fires off a passionate declaration that he has to see for himself how people really judge his moves, and in his head he patters himself on the back. This is the perfect grown-up excuse, no childish performance like he always slips into. His confidence gets instantly wrecked the moment his mother leans in with that knowing grin, teasing him, "So that's really your reason," and he freezes on the spot. That smile slams him into instant panic. His brain whirls, begging to know what her expression really means, and whether his perfect little explanation didn't hit hard enough, so he scrambles to patch the gap, praying it's the logic or the passion she wanted, stuttering out a response. He drops the act and bursts out with his real cravings. He wants to see the outside world, the Estel lands his parents built, and he's furious that his older brother gets to go while he's stuck here. He's instantly mortified by his own childish outburst, face-palming over the slip-up even though he's racked up more than 70 years, but his mother just chuckles, thrilled by his honest answer, and tells him, "That's more like you." He realized his honest plea was all it took. His mother smiled softly and let him head out of town, on one condition. Raymond had to go with him, and he had to remember to put safety first. His father just stared, completely stunned by how fast everything flipped. The Baron spun toward his wife, demanding why she'd changed so suddenly. Then she snapped back that it was all his fault, because he kept sneaking off with Derek alone. He raked his hand through his hair, frustration burning as he admitted he got why his younger brother wanted to copy his big brother. Yet somehow, he couldn't shake the feeling those wise words carried a deeper message he wasn't saying out loud. Her face turned cold, and that chilling smile crawled onto her lips as she snapped whether he was truly unhappy with her permission. Then she slid in a veiled threat, daring him to wonder what would happen if he ever went against her. Cyrus, watching from the side, gave his father a silent thumbs up for making the right call. Once that was settled, his plan to join the inspection was a complete win. Just as they were about to head out, his mom snapped, reminding him that even on their own turf, monsters and bandits could still strike. Then she tripped in a rush, pitched forward, and cried out his name as she fell. Her worry hit like a confirmation. Then he let out a heavy sigh, realizing the truth. Because he was young and the Lord's son, they had no choice but to stack on more guards for his safety, and he quietly apologized for the extra burden they'd have to carry. The carriage door shut with a thud, and the journey blasted off. His permission was tight. He could only ride along to the 3 closest villages and towns, all reachable within a single day. Still, he couldn't help grinning, because getting to step beyond the city walls felt like freedom. With a huge grin plastered across his face, he leaned out of the carriage window and yelled a happy farewell to his parents, and under Raymond's sharp guidance, every inspection slid by smoothly. Smooth sailing? Nope, right at the first village. He messed up when he tried to explain his findings, snapping that a granary built so low could be wiped out by one flood. Good thing Raymond quickly got his message across to the next village's people. As they headed home, he replayed the whole day in his mind, because that third arrow, the final strike to save the harvest, was already paying off fast. He'd run it by Raymond, and the inspection had wrapped up safely. He was sure Raymond, along with him, would keep his little village rampage from getting back to his parents. Then they finally pulled up and he shouted, "Mom, Dad." Beaming with pride, he raises a huge, freshly plucked turnip, eyes blazing with excitement as late autumn in the year 499 of the care calendar settles in. Then he practically shouts for everyone to look at his amazing harvest. His Baron and Baroness parents are left completely stunned when their son suddenly locks onto farming like it's his true calling. With a quick wipe of sweat from his brow, he lays out his plan, because with a food shortage closing in, he's decided to grow turnips on an unused patch of land right on the mansion grounds, even though everyone uses them as animal feed here. And he grins at his sister, Krisha, and jokes that they're one step away from adding Farmer Baron to their family titles. He raves about how amazing turnips are, how ridiculously easy they are to grow, and how even the leaves are edible. Then he remembers his old life, where Zhuge Liang, the legendary military strategist, used them to feed his troops. His next move is clear. He orders Raymond to investigate the cultivation conditions in the places they'd already visited and to learn firsthand from the locals. He laid out a full-blown, multi-layered scheme, pushing his dad to tap his merchant contacts to snag turnip seeds in the veggies, with Mom handling the request first, then ordering Miguel, the head chef, to whip up mind-blowing new recipes, and now those plans were piled right on his desk. Now he hunkers down at his desk and grinds through everything he's gathered, then plans to spread that hard-earned knowledge, seed by seed, across the territory to help defend it from the next wave of lousy artists. While everyone focused on the research, he didn't just sit back. He tried the cultivation methods himself and face-planted straight into the dirt. When he finally lay there, she leaned in and brushed the grime off his face, so close that his heart thudded as he realized his guard was way too good at what she did. He braced himself for a scolding, but then, surprise, she stayed calm and even pitched in with the gardening. As she worked, he spotted his older brother, Derek, out in the distance and called him over, asking if he wanted to join in the harvesting. His brother just brushes it off, "I'm fine," and turns away, and Cyrus clocks the truth. He's caked in dirt and hardly looks welcoming. He stares at his grimy hands thinking, "I've done all I can." Then he plants himself over his pile of harvested turnips, ready to take on whatever bad harvest the land throws at him. A year later, spring in 500 brings a nightmare omen. Graphonia, the mountain god, unleashes pure fury, and a black arm of rage slashes across the border, shrouding the southern Care Kingdom in darkness. In Est, rain never lets up, the clouds never lift, and a young boy finally blurts to his mother, "Will the sky stay black forever?" She cradles a sleeping baby and tells him, steady, faith first, that the Lord's blessings will save them. She's right, because it takes a whole month before the sky cracks open and turns blue again. His mother didn't miss the tiny sparks of worry that flickered right after the first wave of relief, because after a whole month of endless rain, everyone finally cheered when the sun returned, and then the sky stayed clear. No more rain ever came, and that creeping dread sank in fast. At this rate, their crops would wither and die. She snapped into action the second she saw the bad harvest omen, because she'd been warned it was coming. Then she ordered every lifting water wheel to fire up, and every water gate flung wide to blast as much water as possible into the fields. With laser-focused commands, she told them to tweak the gates until even the smallest trickle from the river got routed straight into the irrigation channels, but she drilled one rule into them. Don't ever drain the river dry, because other people depended on it too. Then she snapped her attention to her steward, Raymond, admitting the toll their moves would take on their supplies, before ordering him to keep digging for answers in the other territories, even if they look totally disconnected, so they stay one step ahead of whatever comes next. Raymond nodded and confirmed her orders with her orders barking into the air, her face sharpened with unshakable resolve, because right now, it was all about doing what had to be done. Back in the present, Cyrus remembered how fast his mother snapped into action. Her orders hit instantly, and the farmers whose fields drank deep again erupted in cheers, while she and Raymond blasted word across the territory to cut tax burdens and spread grain from the ever-normal granary, calming the people like a wave calming the sea, and then came the confirmation. The whole plan was actually working. Cyrus talked with Raymond, and Raymond told him the farmers were tightening their belts to survive. The steward didn't sugarcoat it, keep your guard up, but he insisted they still had room to breathe with their stockpile and finances. Hearing that, hope flickered in Cyrus's voice as he asked if this really meant they'd make it through the crisis. Relief hit the boy like a wave. Until this moment, he'd been uneasy, even though the scraps of info he'd dug up made it seem like everything was going right. Now pure gratitude flooded him as he realized they'd truly made it through. Meanwhile, his father echoed the same message, saying the turnip plan was going great, that they'd sail through winter without a hitch, and crediting Cyrus for it. Then he shocked everyone. They didn't just survive the famine and sinking earnings, they hit a massive windfall, piling up serious wealth by feeding neighboring territories. After the meeting, Cyrus tore back to his room and replayed their win in his head, because with a disastrous harvest saved, only 2 of the 5 calamities were still lurking. He pinned down the future like a map. Volcanic eruption in year 500, a brutal border conflict in year 501, and the Orgy River flooding in year 503. Then he snapped to the real emergency. The border war was about to explode in just over a year, ready to chew through soldiers and crush the kingdom's finances. He yawned, and the exhaustion from stopping that crisis finally slammed into him, so he figured he'd coast the rest of the day, laughing at the cruel irony of almost dying from overwork just to get reincarnated and nearly do it again. Then, as he strolled down the hall, a voice suddenly cut through from his father's office. He pressed his ear to the door and finally got it. His father wasn't acting weird for no reason. The guy was groaning about being called the turnip baron, and guilt crashed into the boy, only for him to shove it away and tell himself it wasn't really his fault, probably. His inner panic stayed hidden, even as, in his room at the end of the 500-care calendar year, two maids caught him in this dramatic, pose-filled moment, one thinking he must be stressed about his studies, the other shrugging and blaming diplomatic trouble. Then the second maid turned to her partner and admitted, flat out, that his mood wasn't cute at all, while Cyrus silently spiraled, screaming inside as everything crumbled. But the real reason he kept worrying was the conversation he couldn't stop overhearing. His father said that years ago, when the harvest failed, their ties with the Gorman Viscount to the west soured over ugly fights about grain prices. Now the land was thriving, producing enough to even sell grain cheap, so this feud should have been dead and buried. His voice hardened as their turnip offer blew up in their faces. The Gorman Viscountcy steward snapped it down, calling it a disgrace for any noble to swoop in after a disaster and try to profit from food. Then Raymond, the steward, piled on the grim news. Problems were brewing in the High Ramai Viscount's seat to the east too, with the same complaints coming in. And on top of that, Gorman, who sat upstream, was railing about their water rights during the drought. As Cyrus listened, he remembered a line from Care Calendar year 506. The Solis family's revered young swordsman of light would be undone by his allies' schemes and left standing alone. Baron Solis's words rang in his head like a bell. He only had 5 years left before he watched his first family member fall, and when he pictured his older brother, Derek, the ruthless, powerful swordsman, he couldn't shake the same thought. If his own allies hadn't betrayed them, the enemy wouldn't have stood a chance against Derek's strength. He knew exactly what would happen if this conflict didn't get settled. By early winter of 501, the Estel and Hirami territories would hit starvation's breaking point. Refugees would hurl themselves off their own land, towns would choke with bodies and screams, and the air would fill with rage as hunger finally took over. The thought of what waited for him sparked a cold, raging fury in his chest. Yet even with the crisis looming, Viscount Gorman didn't budge at all, driving his parents and even Raymond to the edge of their patience, and then a brutal idea flashed in his mind. Maybe they should just crush the Gorman Viscountcy before he shoved it down fast. A month dragged by and everything only got worse. Cyrus strode through the estate, peering out the window, and his worst fears hit hard. The refugees kept piling in, swelling by the minute. Crushing the danger with his own eyes, Cyrus sprinted straight to his parents, only to find his mother trembling with worry as chaos crept through the city. Right when both of them were stunned, he stepped forward and blurted that he had a plan, demanding they summon his father too. Curiosity kicked in, and his mother, shaken but hooked, agreed, saying his idea sounded dangerously interesting. His mother's face set like stone, and she backed him with zero doubt, pushing them to charge forward with his plan, no hesitations, no second thoughts. Later on in Est's quiet town, a lone figure in a dark hooded cloak slipped into a crumbling, abandoned building, and he dropped to his knees among the wreckage, exhaustion and purpose hanging in every tense motion. He watched the people outside, and the weight of his choices hit him, because he'd bent history out of shape, and now fresh chaos was spilling in. The territory was taking in refugees, all tied back to what had happened with the two viscounts, and he remembered being warned, even though back then he had no clue how huge it would become. With grim-level certainty, Commander Weiss finally saw it. This moment held the worst fate imaginable, waiting right around the corner, and he forced his courage to lock in as he drove forward. In a lavish room inside a massive estate, a light-haired boy named Solis von Tecker hunched over a desk stacked with books, because he's the second son of Baron Solis, ruling over a far-off territory south of the Kar Kingdom, and then he drops the bombshell. He's not just living, he's living his third life right now. Then it hits lightning-fast flashes of his past slam into him. First, Nishida Takahiro, a Japanese salaryman, grinding himself to death and leaving his wife with a broken world. Second, Takir, the Solis family's second son, surrounded by disaster, siblings and family torn away, until war finally crushes him and he ends up executed, at least that's what he thinks. The memory of his very first death crashes back, right when he collapses, drained to the bone. Then, as he remembers turning his back on her, a heart-crushing memory of his wife slams into his mind. The story snaps back to the care calendar, year 501, an 8-year-old Dakar now, throwing himself across his desk with a grin, and practically shouting that he's finished all his assignments for the day. He finished his studies, snatched his formal jacket, and sprinted down the stairs, dying to get out and see what's next. He strides down the corridor, and a maid with short dark hair clocks him at once. When he says he's heading out, she instantly declares she'll go with him. She lunges in to fix his jacket, claiming it's her job as his attendant, but Carr just waves her off, grinning, telling her he's got it, and zips the jacket on by himself. Right as he's done, a hand yanks him from behind. An older blonde boy, Solis von Derek, the eldest son, locks him in a playful headlock. Derek grins and calls him Mr. Prodigy, then needles him about going out again, even though he just finished his assignments, and the car honks, calling for his older brother. Even with his brother's teasing tone, Tacker gets the real message, and vents inside that Derek's just too perfect for someone who should have stayed in his lane as the younger brother, while Derek actually seems to buy the whole prodigy idea without a hint of doubt. In his past life, he remembered his brother's legend, equal parts awe and dread. Derek had slashed his way into greatness at 13, led his first campaign at 14, and by 16, his blade skills, victories, and rising fame had neighboring kingdoms backing up fast. Cyrus couldn't even count how many times he'd been thrown down and beaten when it came to facing him. Cyrus's scorching stare made Derek blurt out, "Why are you staring like that?" Inside, Cyrus swore this future was one he couldn't let happen, because if history stayed untouched, his older brother would be killed in battle in just 5 years. Derek saw that look and, thinking it was a joke, ruffled his hair and teased if it was one of his secrets. Then Cyrus blurted, all flustered, "No, it's nothing." Ripping free, he bolted off, swearing he'd grab something delicious from the market stalls, and while Derek watched him vanish, the young boy slipped into the special refugee camp section of Est, a town packed with displaced people. Now with his maid Eliza at his side, Cyrus swept his gaze across the scene. She said things had finally settled down, and he nodded, admitting that it was everyone's help that made it possible. Last year, the Care Kingdom's southern border got slammed by disasters spilling out of the neighboring Graphonia Empire, first a violent volcano, then a grinding drought. While Estel territory fought through it with stored food in an ever-normal granary, the famine wrecked 2 nearby Biscounties, and refugees flooded into Estonia. Under Raymond Sand's House Steward command, refugee relief kicked into gear. He set up a reception zone inside the lower city walls, tucked the displaced into temporary shelters, ran food distribution, and made warm soup from dried noodles a daily staple. After taking it all in, Cyrus locked in his next move. He said he'd show up at the reception desk first, and Eliza gave his plan a quiet, knowing nod. At the loud, busy reception desk, Claire barked orders at the new arrivals. Get in line, go straight to the receptionist, and get registered. She'd be jotting down your name, gender, age, what you used to do, and even the names of anyone you came with. She kept firing questions, pushing them to name where they came from. When the refugee finally said they'd fled from a village just east of Estel, and her quill went tap 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 as she wrote it all down. At the refugee reception desk, a supervisor slams through the registration for a refugee couple and presses a bright token into their hands, warns them, "Don't you dare lose this," because it's their ticket to food distribution and work assignments. Then points them to the bulletin board packed with job applications, reminding them the camp itself was built by refugees working with their own hands. As the couple thanks her and starts to walk out, she urges them to hit the consultation window the moment anything feels off. Her perfectly professional mask cracks the second she spots a familiar face racing toward her. She gasps, "Ah, Takiya-sama, Cyrus," and when she sees her, she blurts a warm hello, praising her work on the spot. Caught off guard by the praise, her cheeks explode with color as she stammers out a genuine thank you. The moment the exchange happens, every other woman at the desk, refugees working there, whips around and rushes to Cyrus, shouting how grateful they are that he saved their lives and even gave them wages. And as they wonder how they could ever repay him, Cyrus stares, stunned, because everyone recognizes him, Solis Bernie's child prodigy, and that realization hits him like a bad omen. The supervisor barrels in and snaps at the women for crowding up, insisting the fastest way to repay their benefactor is to work their hardest, and as one of them drops into a deep bow to apologize, Cyrus quietly murmurs, "Sorry about the mess." She whirls towards Cyrus and blurts out an apology, saying everyone's been talking about his status and his proposals, and Cyrus just laughs it off, then admits he's regretting going too far. Later, as she walked beside her and the blonde noblewoman, Cyrus leaned over at the reception desk and asked, "Is everything running smooth?" The supervisor nodded and said it was. Turns out even the fresh refugees were catching on fast, and the number of tasks they finished every day was climbing higher and higher. Her sharp, professional armor melts as she blurts out her gratitude, telling everyone the refugees are genuinely grateful, those warm meals, that work, everything. Then she drops the truth. She grew up in an orphanage, and that trust hitting her like a wave feels impossibly huge. Tears welling up, she blurts that she's sorry for the personal detour, but Cyrus calmly cuts in calling her name, Claire. She meets her gaze with pure confidence, promises that he'll need her help again and again, and when that spark hits, Claire straightens up, nods hard, and agrees without hesitation. Cyrus stands there with his maid at his side, slams his hand down, and declares the reception area, packed with complex systems, is a total must if they want to survive the calamities coming next. Then he insists they set everything up immediately, and straight up tells them it's time to jump in and help too. He strides up to the swelling line of refugees and tells them the system's main goal is simple: lock down the people it needs. Then he drops a bombshell that those registration tokens were forged by Carl at the workshop, even though they were meant for something else entirely. As they roll along, he flashes one of the tokens to Claire, this one stamped with a bird emblem and the number 1881, and then he drops the compliment. Her work is so impressive she's even being eyed for a managerial position. She pauses, stunned by the massive change that's hit her, because like Raymond, she finally understands Cyrus' real cause, stops snapping at the kid who's 10 years younger than her, and starts looking at him with respect. The cold ice lady persona is completely gone from her heart. Her thoughts click into place. Cyrus is finally proving himself as a solid supporter, a real ally. The refugee relief is running smooth until a few days later when chaos hits. Gorman Vi Council drops an official notice demanding they all be returned. This was a total crisis. So many refugees had fled the Gorman and Hyremia Viscounties. The whole plan was simple: give everyone the same support, no matter where they came from, but that official notice slammed the door shut and made it impossible to keep doing it. The Solis family faced a brutal choice. The Gorman Viscounty refugees could stay in the camps and eat, but they were never getting work again. But the refugees were already one step ahead. Whispers about the new policy ripped through the camp, and when registration time finally hit, not one soul claimed they were from Gorman Viscounty. Since the officials couldn't verify where they really came from, they had no choice but to register them anyway, knowing the truth was being hidden. A few days later, an official outside the reception area shouts for everyone to line up and register, and promises them there's more than enough food, because the rumors were planted on purpose to warn the refugees early, even though everyone was still left holding their breath, wondering if this plan would actually run smooth. Cyrus strides right into the crowd, lifts his hand, and locks eyes with everyone, telling the outsiders from Estel territory not to panic, to fall in line, and that all they'll be asked for is their name back in their hometown or village. He blurts, "Excuse me," at a tall, cloaked figure standing right in the middle of the refugee crowd. Then the young boy snaps his head up, waiting eagerly, and answers with a simple, "Yes." The hooded man whips around, and there, right behind him, is a grim crew of weary mercenaries. He tells Cyrus they used to work for the Gorman Viscount C and asks for a meal, and Cyrus clocks the man's blunt honesty while he tries to figure out what to do with these Gorman-linked mercs. He keeps talking, voice scraped raw, saying their old employers cut the contract because they were calling them useless mouths. The moment Cyrus hears it, it all clicks, then he steps in fast, telling him not to worry at all. He leans in, tells the man they must have endured a brutal road, and jerks his thumb toward the registration area, then says, "Get in line and register at the reception desk." The second that's done, they'll be handed food right away, and the mercenaries' eyes flash with shocked surprise. The man leans down toward Cyrus and his hard face softens. "Thank you," he breathes, then adds with full honesty, "I owe you one." A few hours later, Cyrus is elbow-deep in cleanup duty, hauling a giant basket of used dishes, when a voice from behind snaps, and it recognizes him as the guy from earlier. Cyrus whips around and spots the mercenary leader coming straight at him. Then the man blurts that the reception desk told him everything. Cyrus is the feudal lord's son, and the mastermind behind the whole relief plan. Cyrus lets out an awkward laugh, admitting it doesn't feel true at all, since he spent his life getting hauled over the coals for not acting like a real noble. When the truth hits him, the mercenary drops into a deep bow and blurts out an apology for his earlier snob attitude, then admits he wasn't just stunned by Cyrus' generosity, he was blown away by the fact that Cyrus was the one who first pushed for the refugee relief measures. He tilts his head, locks his eyes in, and declares his name, then blasts, "Weiss Schwarzfach." He tells Weiss it's great to meet him, shoots an apology for how he looks right now, and jumps in to help with the cleanup. Then he introduces himself as Takar, the second son of Baron Solis, and gives Weiss a proper, formal thank you as the brand new leader and the representative of the 30-person doppelfucking mercenary crew. He grins at the man, telling him that when trouble hits, sticking together is the real move, and when the name drops, it hooks his attention. He repeats it slowly, eyes narrowing. Weiss Schwartz fought. Weiss snaps into an explanation of their mess. He even admits it's humiliating. Ever since the Gorman Viscountcy put out that order against helping outsiders, they've been bouncing from town to town, starving and unable to snag a single meal. While Cyrus listens, a chill hits him because the name Black Hawk Weiss feels way too familiar, like he's heard it before. Confusion flashes across his face as he pauses, trying to match the names to the faces in his head. Suddenly, the realization slams into him like a gut punch. He reels back, sends a bowl of food skidding to the floor with a sharp clatter, and a raw, shocked cry rips out of his mouth. His mind sprints as everything finally clicks, and suddenly it all hits him. He remembers now. Then the memories crash into his mind. Graphonia's Black Hawk Weiss, the Northern Expeditionary Corps, invincible general, and in just 12 years, he's going to invade the Care Kingdom and seize the Estel territories. Snapping back to the moment, Cyrus watches Weiss kneel and start scooping up the shattered plates, even telling him to stop pushing himself. Then it hits him like a punch. This is the same man who had him executed. His mind fights to piece together how he died. Everything blurs into a fog, like he's stuck in a daze when he finally throws his hands up, and he can't even swear whether Weiss was there because he got completely derailed by another guy's beard. As his thoughts spin out of control, Weiss cuts back in and promises he'll repay him. The mercenary leader stared at him with raw sincerity and promised, "We'll repay your kindness any way we can. Just tell Cyrus to reach out when the time comes." Weiss's offer ignites a desperate spark inside Cyrus, because he knows exactly what he wants, and his silent, urgent plea begs Weiss to stay as far away from the Graphonia Empire as possible. His thoughts spun from the worst possible shock. This was a full-blown emergency, no delays allowed. He stood over the very man who would one day be his executioner, and panic hit like a wave, forcing him to act right now. He had to forge a countermeasure, immediately, before this deadly chance vanished forever. In his study, Cyrus trembles with pure panic. His soul hovers beside him like a terrified ghost. Then he slams down the start of an emergency meeting, determined to figure out how to dodge his own death. His mind snapped back to the one thing that could have caused his death in his past life, Commander Weiss Schwarzfach, the Graphonia Empire's unstoppable young general, the Black Falcon, a political genius and war terror who burst onto the scene, snatched the throne for the third prince, and never once tasted defeat. As that old history comes into sharper focus, in the year 513 of the Care Kingdom, a 20-year-old Takir, fresh off the edge of fate, got an imperial order from the new emperor, invade. He figured the quickest path ran straight through the T-gun settlement, and even with barely any troops, he charged forward to do his noble duty. A soldier burst in, breathless and terrified. "Tikar, the demon realm is pouring out a monster army, over 50,000 strong." Tikar froze in shock because the empire was only supposed to have 30,000. Weiss had pulled off a brutal flanking trick, secretly marching his troops through the deadly realm to fool both sides. He remembered how he'd slammed into them with a tiny force just to buy time for his people to flee, only to get crushed, no matter what. General Weiss then promised to take his surrender and save his subjects, demanding only his land and his life. And before the dust even settled, Weiss seized Estel and had him executed, because that was everything he'd lived through, the whole grim truth from the last history. Cyrus Grimsey snaps back to the present and clocks the truth. Those mercenaries, brutalized in the Gorman Viscountcy, aren't just wandering off. They're racing for the Graphonia Empire, and the only route is through the demon realm, where monsters wait and traps get spring-loaded. Even if they got stopped somewhere else, he knows they'd still be shoved into the same nightmare treatment. He clocked their weakness right away, hunger gnawing, fatigue dragging their steps, because in his old life he'd had zero countermeasures, so no one in his territory would have ever expected help. Still, even like this, he's sure they'll somehow crawl into the Empire and make it there safe. Then it hits him hard. The unfair treatment and the gut-punch loss of their companions is all it takes for them to burn through anyone standing in their way, and his eyes go wide as it all clicks. Gorman Viscount's move is the exact spark that flips his own death flag. Memory of his father's furious lecture, how a noble profiting from disaster brings disgrace, rips through Cyrus' mind, and suddenly panic turns into purpose. He slams his fist on the desk, realizing that if he doesn't stop those mercenaries from reaching the Empire, he'll be finished, and so will his people, and now he scrambles for any way to stop them. His determination crumbles into raw frustration. He slams onto his desk, groaning that his mind's gone blank, and the pressure keeps roaring as he snaps at himself. One idea, just anything at all to flip their fate and change that look on their faces. He stood at the window, jaw tight, resolve hardening like steel, no other option. He had to move before those mercenaries slipped out of town. He clenched his fist, realizing his childlike look was the perfect opening to strike, so now his mission was crystal clear: get close to the mercenary leader, Weiss. With that goal burned into his mind, he launched his act, sprinting around with a stick like any normal kid his age. Pretending he was checking the refugee camp, he started showing up every day at that corner where the mercenaries had set up their camp. Every single day, he ran right beside their camp, keeping watch and cheering like crazy, popping to attention whenever the mercenary barked, "Charge," during drills. That nonstop presence finally snagged the attention of one armored guard. He snapped that a lord's son didn't belong in a place like this. Cyrus didn't even flinch. He just grinned, thanked the man, and declared their morning work was officially over. Even marched straight up to their leader, calling Weiss by name, and Cyrus said his parents had okayed it all, calling it a priceless lesson, as long as he chipped in with the food drops. Weiss brushed it off, saying his words were too kind, and then quietly acted like none of it was happening. After earning their trust, he jumped up onto a crate so he could talk to Weiss eye to eye, then asked straight out about something he'd read, the bitter war between the Care Kingdom and the Graphonia Empire, and whether a sudden attack was really on the way. Weiss just chuckled at him and made it clear that was exactly where his worries were coming from. Mercenaries' reaction snapped everything into place. Cyrus finally knew Weiss and his crew were riding for the Empire to take a job, just like the memories that haunted him. Weiss would rise, get promoted to general after winning that war against the Suradachi. He flipped the map in his head and demanded the answer. Was Weiss talking about the Southern Gate? Weiss flat out said taking the fort would be a brutal, monumental job, because even with an imperial general's muscle, breaking into the kingdom is insanely hard with 30,000 Knight Order soldiers at the front and more forts than you can count, turning every supply line into a nightmare. And then, relief hit Cyrus like a... His relief barely had time to breathe. Then his hand hovered over the ground, and a nasty new thought slammed into him. What if he tried something totally different? He grabbed a stick and started carving out a crude map in the dirt, while the mercenary Weiss stared, clocking every careful move. He laid it all out, breaking down the strategy step by step, pointing to the deadly gap in the massive mountain range that split the two countries. Then he mapped the main route to the capital and flagged the southern gate, warning that pushing forward would be brutal with those powerful nobles sitting in the region. That whole explanation was really for Weiss. He threw out a scary what if and asked, what if an invading army just skipped the fort? Then he mapped a flanking play. Split part of the army and slip it through a tight passage inside the demon realm, right along the edge of the Hirami Viscount's territory. He dragged a line in the dirt and laid out the plan, slip through the Estel territory for a sudden strike, then bolt via the Cornell barony and charge straight for the capital, steamrolling every other lord and fortress in the way. As Weiss listened, his face turned stone serious. Under those mercenaries' intense stares, he snapped out of it and tried to play it off, saying he was only curious after reading something like it in a book, and that he feared their home would turn into a battlefield. Then he faked a tiny yelp, all while thinking about just how hard Weiss was locking eyes on him. Weiss leaned in, admitted the idea was damn intriguing, then shut it down on the spot, because there were 5 reasons this wouldn't work. Next, he demanded to know why the young master would even dream up a plan like that. Cyrus answered with a simple truth. It looked like the quickest way, while inside, he was already calculating how to move without turning Weiss into a lockdown fortress. The mercenary started laying it all out, one reason after another. This plan demanded a huge, roaming army, which screamed weak point. They'd have to march straight through the deadly demon realm. Imperial troops wouldn't know the land well enough to cross safely. The roads out there were too rough and unfinished to keep supplies flowing. And they'd need flawless coordination with the main force across a massive distance, so Cyrus just acted like he was innocently curious. He finished his assessment and basically crushed the idea. No roads, unknown ground, brutal supply lines, and monsters guaranteed to pop out meant you couldn't march a massive army through there. The plan was dead. Cyrus pretended to feel relieved, but one hard truth still stood. In just 12 years, that nightmare would play out exactly like he warned. Cyrus kept his face stone calm, but inside his thoughts sprinted, because Weiss knew that road like the back of his hand, the very route Cyrus used to reach the Empire. Weiss also understood every brutal danger of the demon realm that the Imperial army never even prepared for. And it wasn't just familiarity. Cyrus himself had helped forge the road from Estel to Tigun. Down the line, his cavalry would pound that path and secure supplies by raiding during harvest season. The one commanding this ruthless assault, the swift Black Falcon. He flashed a cheerful grin and insisted he'd been worrying for nothing, and Weiss snapped back that the idea was fascinating and totally opened his eyes. Then Cyrus apologized for even raising something so weird, even as he realized, deep down, that this was the last missing piece. It was this man's betrayal that let his nemesis, someone he hadn't met yet in this new life, surge forward so fast. Weiss kept digging into the invasion theory, and he listened like every word mattered, because the mercenary just tore a hole in the plan. The Empire would need a defensive base to protect their backline, and if they didn't have it, Marquis Hasburg's strike would wipe them out completely. Just as he was about to explain, Cyrus cut in with a sweet-sounding question: where would Weiss himself set up a base if he were the Empire's general? Inside, the boys erupted with excitement since they already knew the answer. Weiss thought for a beat, then pointed to the most likely spot, T-Gun Mountain. His answer matched Cyrus's every hunch. Then he burst out laughing with a triumphant cry and revealed the invasion route had been built exactly like this. A map laid it all bare. From the Graphonia Empire, straight across the Demon Realm past the Southern Gate Fort, and into the T-Gun region through the same lands he'd already described. And to seal it, he said they'd plan to use that very path to reach the border too. Weiss locked eyes with the mercenary, and the dread hit him hard. This wasn't a moment for friendship at all. To survive what came next, he had to borrow the power of the greatest strategist he knew, and the realization sank in. Then, right when it clicked, his attention got yanked away, because the urgency in the mercenary's face turned Weiss serious as he asked what couldn't wait. Standing before Steward Raymond, Cyrus blurted out that he wants to pitch his proposal to his parents ASAP, even if he's still polishing the details. Raymond apologized for stealing the boys' time, but Cyrus waved it off. He truly didn't mind. He kicks things off by begging Raymond to lend him his power. Raymond, without saying a word, immediately gives his silent approval. Right when they're about to go, the maid bursts into the room and announces she's brought refreshments for them. On a seat, Raymond flashes a gentle smile and drops an old proverb: rushing things only leads to trouble. Cyrus takes a sip from his cup, and the warm drink calms his nerves while Raymond keeps a steady watch on him from across the room. He leans into Raymond and drops the bombshell. 2 proposals are on the table, and he begs for a moment so he can lay out the quick outline. He kicks things off with the very first proposal, one that's all about the refugees' future. Cyrus slams the current setup as impossible and pushes for one bold move. Take them in and make them new citizens so the territory's production power can surge. Raymond agrees they're close to the same idea, but he won't let it slide. He grills the boy on exactly how he plans to bring them into society. Cyrus fires back with his plan: recruit them, and then sets up a brand new settlement right on T-Gun Mount. Gorman blurts out why he thinks T-Gun is the right place, and Cyrus, feeling the steward's sharp eyes on him, answers that it's because most of the refugees come straight from the Gorman and Hirami territories. He leans in and taps the map, explaining that T-Gun is tucked out in the distance, right near both of their territories, yet almost impossible to scout. Then he points out the real danger in places like that: bandits and monsters. But he smiles because T-Gun's natural defenses make it safe enough to keep breathing. And to seal it all, he drops the big reveal. He's been planning to turn that settlement into a launchpad to push into the Demon Realm, where death stalks you, but so does a fortune of treasures. Listen up before you bring up anything else. Hear the proposal first. He fired off a question to Cyrus. Did he know the 2-headed Falcon mercenary crew was staying at EST for now? Cyrus nodded. Yeah, he'd heard the news. The young lord laid out his plan, pounding the table as he said the Solis family guards the border, so they must keep forging a stronger army, non-stop. After talking with the mercenaries, he vouched for their incredible leader and their powerhouses of a crew, and then he finished with the killer point. They couldn't afford to let this once-in-a-lifetime chance to recruit them slip away. Stewart frowned in deep thought, while Cyrus pushed the idea forward and linked it to his very first proposal. If they wanted the new settlers safe, they'd have to hire guards, and luckily their recent hunch about grain had already brought in the exact money they needed. He mapped out the whole game plan: hire those mercenaries to guard the new settlement for now, and in the process forge stronger fighting power for the future too. It was his 2 birds, 1 stone play. Then, as he turned to his steward for a verdict, Raymond stayed cool and pointed out the brutal price tag of bringing on 30 mercenaries. A knowing smirk curled at Raymond's lips as he pressed. So that's all there is to your proposal. And the moment he said it, Cyrus felt the tension hit. Cyrus gulped from his cup, because his steward had already clocked the whole thing and saw straight through his first pitch. He finally got it. Raymond probably had already gotten Anne's report, and with a smug little smile, he admitted to himself that he'd actually already planned a way to shut those costs down. He laid out the rest of his scheme, and gave the mercenary leader a green light to keep doing what he always did: monster hunts and caravan escorts, while still serving the barony. That extra paycheck would fatten the mercs' income, and suddenly, a real budget deal became possible. He tossed a personal request right into the proposal, demanding that Weiss become his instructor. Seeing how solid and trustworthy the man was, with his legendary skill in swordplay and military strategy, Cyrus wasted no time making it clear. He wanted to learn every combat tactic under his guidance. Stewart finally nodded in agreement, admitting the proposals had no real flaws and that the paperwork could be handed to Darren Sama and Karisu Sama. Then Cyrus started to exhale in relief, but Raymond snapped his hopes in half with one sharp, warning word. However, the young lord's face dropped, then a grimace hit as the truth dawned on him. This was way too soon to start naming him as an instructor. He just knew his superiors would push first to see whether that mercenary was really as trustworthy as he'd claimed. They cornered him and demanded to know what he planned next for the settlement. He laid out his vision for Tigun with crystal clarity, building a thriving settlement to fuel their economy and stand as a fortress for the southern edge of the Estel territory. And since he was the second son, he swore it was his duty to back his older brother, the future head of the house, because this was the foundation of everything, the one thing he would not, let slip. The very next day inside a stuffy meeting room, Raymond leaned in and told Cyrus' father, "I've got the plan, I'll take it from here." The old man looked drained, then glanced at his son and sighed, saying he'd heard every detail from Raymond, and it felt like trouble had been lining up one after another with him. Talking with his wife, he poured out his money worries. Sure, the barony had gotten some breathing room from the recent profits, but this new development demanded a whole different kind of investment, and he feared that once the final scale was set, they might not be able to cough up the full 10% he'd promised. As he started blurting out his worries about angering the viscounts, his wife snapped the moment shut, reminding him that their profit from late was only there because of Cyrus' proposal, and without it their territory would be rotting in the same desperate mess as the others. Her eyes hardened. Political battles were his job, she said, and none of it was any concern of their son. Elsewhere, Cyrus sat there, chewing on his father's fears, clashing with the viscounts, choking through the refugee crisis and begging resources from the demon realm, until it hit him like a punch. His dad was pitiful, but his mother, she was the strongest one in the room. His father dropped the final verdict. Yes, the plan would move forward, and Raymond would handle the details so he and Cyrus could hash everything out later. But they shut down the request for a swordsmanship instructor, and the whole settlement governing situation got frozen until Cyrus turned 15. Still, the boy nodded and accepted the deal. Then he leaned in and told his son, "Because your past proposals worked, you're getting 50 gold coins as a reward." He warned Cyrus that it was an enormous fortune, more than a commoner would earn for years, and told him to spend it smart. Cyrus stared up at him, stunned by the news. 50 gold coins, those digits hit him like a punch, and suddenly the reward's weight slammed into his bones. For an 8-year-old noble from a barony, it was an insane fortune, and his mind started racing as he realized he had to spend it wisely for his very next move. He snapped himself back into focus, choosing to weigh the stakes of success instead. Sure, the instructor's proposal was denied, but the real priority was keeping the mercenary group from getting hit with a nasty arraignment. Once his mind was made up, he bowed sharply and asked to be excused. Right when it seemed like everything would go on without a hitch, a sudden young man with long blonde hair in a ponytail burst in, sending Cyrus's attention straight to him. And trailing behind, Cyrus clocked his brother Derek, alongside a young noblewoman. The newcomer called Cyrus Nisama, immediately owning up to the interruption, then pushed past the apology, insisting he had to be heard, because this situation involved him too. His request was granted fast. Before he knew it, he was standing at his father's desk with Cyrus right beside him. The Baron looked drained, still let him talk, but dread rolled through the room. The young man nodded politely and asked if he could stand there, and a confused Cyrus just blinked, then agreed. What he said next hit Cyrus like a slammed door. His eyes flew wide, and one shattered thought ricocheted through his head. Teach this is. With a steady voice, the blonde brother stepped up and delivered his formal request, begging to learn under mercenary leader Weiss and asking his father to finally give him a chance. The twist hit so hard it left Cyrus completely stunned, but the young man didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the goal, calm and unshakable. In his father's study, Derek straightens up and makes a formal plea, speaking for himself and his little brother, Cyrus, and tells them they want to train under the mercenary leader. A sudden proposal hits their parents like a lightning strike, catching them completely off guard. Meanwhile, their father glares from his desk and grills Derek about why he made such a wild, abrupt call, and their mother just watches, worry etched across her face. After a beat, he tells his son to spell out his reasoning, and standing right by his older brother, Cyrus jumps in with a huge, loud yes to confirm it. The man kicks off his argument, reminding his father about the legendary 9 levels of swordsmanship, and lays it all out. This ladder, from total cluelessness to the sword god, makes every fighter instantly see where they stand. He shoots his argument straight to his father, admitting that while the soldiers of the Solis barony are fearless, almost none can actually swing a blade, and his father listens, forced to agree. His son is right. With the other 2 available sword masters already lit up and sitting in manager chairs, it's gotten way harder to get real guidance from them, and Cyrus can't hide his awe at how deep his brother's foresight really goes. Cyrus can't help but think after his brother's relentless thoroughness, because in the last timeline, Derek shocked everyone by becoming a sword saint at just 16, and now, the signs are screaming the same future. Derek's packed with insane potential, and rumors say he's already started manifesting light magic, something almost unheard of in their kingdom. That thought slams into him and he realizes, way too fast, Derek's growing about 3 years ahead of where he was in the old timeline, and he blurts his brother's name, Derek, in stunned disbelief. While Cyrus wrestles with the shock, his father, swallowed by Derek's argument, nods and agrees to the request, saying he gets it and promising to have Raymond handle everything, especially if Cyrus isn't happy with his training partner. He starts pitching the idea, saying that if they want a real sword expert, he's got someone in mind, until Cyrus barrels in mid-sentence and cuts him off with one blunt word, father. His youngest son hit him with one razor-sharp thought, how naive of you. Then Cyrus erupted, blaming his father's naivety on one savage truth. Sir Weiss's swordsmanship had already climbed to the level of a sword demon. Compared to you, Weiss is a whole rank ahead. He snapped and the Baron recoiled, stunned, his mind spinning from the shock of it. The news hit like a punch, so hard the Baron crumpled forward and collapsed onto the table, completely broken. His wife Derek and Cyrus just stared at the dead silence that followed. Eric winked at his father and said he got why he was worried, then agreed it was fine, just not yet. They'd wait until after his father checked in a Weiss, and only then would they make the final call. The Baron, still reeling, finally seemed to give in. With everything that had just unfolded, the meeting slammed to an end. Then the Baron barked for a full-scale investigation into Weiss and his mercenary crew. Cyrus thought back to how Derek's sudden help had saved him this time, but he still couldn't shake the question, what on earth sparked Derek's wild growth? Right behind him, Derek erupted in celebration over the win, and Cyrus felt it too. Once they gathered the right info, they'd finally be allowed to train with Weiss. His motive was dead simple. After seeing just how freakishly talented his little brother was, he threw his whole heart into one mission. He refused to let himself lose that spot. That realization hit Cyrus like a punch, so he hurried to Derek and apologized for accidentally setting him off again. Derek just waved it off, saying it was totally fine, and that's when Cyrus finally understood why his brother had been acting so weird. At the mercenary crew's temporary training camp in the outskirts of Est, 11-year-old Solis von Derek drops into a rest, lets his sword settle on his shoulder, and with a tired but content yawn says they're calling it a day, thanking their instructor for the lesson like he's earned it. He wipes the sweat from his brow and thanks Weiss again and again, while the mercenary leader looms beside a grinning Cyrus, watching the boy's progress unfold. After training left him completely wiped out, he crashed into a deep, sound sleep. Then 3 months later, since the brothers started studying under Weiss, everything's changed. 8-year-old Cyrus is overflowing with energy, laughing at full volume, while his older brother Derek is still half asleep, scratching his head and grumbling that Cyrus is sloppy. Cyrus was more blown away by his brother's breakneck rise. Weiss's teachings were strict, yet Derek drank them in at insane speed, and his skills just kept blooming. Cyrus pressed, "Are you already a sword expert?" Because he still remembered their father's jaw dropping at how far Derek had come. He couldn't shake the thought that Derek had leapt past the swordsmen, and even the veteran ranks so fast that regular soldiers would soon be outmatched. Their training stayed steady, 3 times a week, alternating between the temporary grounds and their mansion's courtyard. He gave a shy little smile and credited all his success to one thing, his incredible teacher. Under a sky full of stars, Cyrus felt downright pathetic, like all he could do was watch. He cried out that he was still stuck as a trainee, trapped from graduating, and the worst part, he couldn't even match other 8-year-olds in swordsmanship, and that humiliation burned so deep it nearly crushed him. He slumped by the tree, convinced he needed to learn just as much as his brother under their great teacher, yet it felt like he was still coming up short, and Weiss watched him in silence while Derek sprawled and napped against the trunk. You heave a long, exhausted sigh like all the fight just drained out of you. Even though his own progress felt like a grind, everything bigger was running like clockwork. His swordsmanship training kept clicking, and the settlement group preparations rolled out almost exactly the way he'd pictured. His thoughts snapped back to the settlement. He'd already sent field investigators, even hiring refugees to work the T-gun area. First, they had to throw up inns and shops, a real hub for hunters who could enter and leave the demon realm without chaos. It began small, but the plan was clear. Make it run like a normal town. The only thorn in his side, no outer wall yet. He wanted to raise one fast just so everyone could be safe. He admitted the real reason everything was running so smoothly. Raymond was calling the shots, and thank goodness he'd looped him in. Even the mercenary crew was doing their part, rotating in to visit the settlement, and the advance team had already welcomed them, so now they were side by side boosting the town. while the big construction crew was set to roll in 6 months later to officially cement the settlement. He was totally lost when his brother's voice sliced through the chaos. "Hey, Takir." Cyrus spun around and answered. For a split second, everything clicked back into place. Weiss had been handling the settlement through his vice captain, bouncing between Est and the new settlement to keep their training going. And as for the big deal, the Baron Salai's household and the mercenary crew had locked in an initial 2-year contract. Then they could renew it year by year after that. He slumped there, exhausted, trying to tune out his brother Derek, who was waving a wooden sword like a live wire. Derek swore he'd rested enough and demanded a fight, but Cyrus could only plead for peace and begging to be left alone. His brother burst into laughter, clapped a grip on his shoulders, and snapped that if he kept failing like this, he'd be stuck as a trainee forever. Cyrus's face dropped in stunned silence. In the background, Weiss stared, muttering to himself that Cyrus just needed a breather, because he was sure the kid could make it. But his mind was already somewhere else, soaring over the landscape, and now he could finally lock in, hammering out countermeasures for the 5 great calamities. Later, locked in his room at the desk, he was grinding through his studies when a knock snapped the silence. Then the door swung open. She stepped in and said, "Your workshop delivery just arrived." It hit him instantly. This was it, the exact thing he'd begged Carl to forge. He demanded it be delivered straight to his room, eyes locked in, because now, with this in hand, he could finally launch the 5th arrow. His thoughts slammed back to why this all mattered. He could see the future he knew. Next year, when he turned 9, the Solis Baron's army would get wrecked in a brutal border battle, taking huge losses and gutting their power. This was the 4th of the 5 great calamities, and to stop it, he'd been building his plan since he was 5. The weapon he'd been grinding on for ages, a bow, crafted and ready for war. The plan had one job: meet 3 deadly rules, hit from far beyond the enemy's reach, punch through the Empire's iron cavalry armor, and work even when the wielder isn't skilled, because anyone could use it. The whole project kicked off with Carl pitching in at the workshop, starting with Cyrus pushing him to upgrade the world's bow materials, then carving a composite bow by stacking different woods, and finally cranking it up even more by adding metal and monster materials. At the workshop, Geld strained to finish drawing the bow, grunting that this kind of weapon wasn't for just anyone, and while Carl stared in amazement, Cyrus snapped the truth into focus. Such raw power and reach demanded brutal physical strength, smashing right into one of his biggest design promises. He cooked up a brand new weapon, a crossbow that blended a composite bow's power with a compound bow's precision, built on a 20th century design that slapped in 4 pulleys to slash the draw weight while blasting the arrow's initial velocity sky-high, then locked it onto a stand so anyone could aim steadier and fire cleaner. Once the workshop got slammed with orders for water wheels, he decided to drag a prototype home and keep the research going himself. Fueled by everything he remembered from the videos Nishida had watched, he kept tinkering nonstop, juggling the string's positions, attachments, sizes, and combos until it all clicked. That fierce dedication came from one burning wish he guarded like a secret in his chest, to protect his family and the ground they called home. He knew one thing: if those feelings ever disappeared, he'd have quit ages ago. He poured every last bit of his father's gift into this project, and when it came time to lock it in, it was Carl who made the final, make-or-break tweaks to the bow's materials and components. After pouring in all that effort, the prototype finally stood finished, and he practically burst with pride. When his hand lifted the lid of the wooden crepe, he declared, "It's here." He proudly unveiled the finished weapon, an absolutely brutal crossbow that towered almost as high as he did, while, just behind him, a row of other completed models waited in the wings for inspection. He told them to build 2 versions, one super sturdy, top-tier, high-cost model packed with composite bow construction plus pulleys for maximum strength, and a budget low-cost version with a composite bow but 0 pulleys. His design wasn't random, it was ripped straight from history. Crossbows had their ups and downs. Europe's 100 Years' War crowned the longbow king, but in Japan crossbows faded fast because everyone already relied on their own bows and early firearms. That history fit their situation perfectly, right down to the details. The neighboring Care Kingdom even trained with bows too, but real skill demanded relentless practice, and with so many Solis Baronese soldiers being militia, nobody could realistically expect them to grind through training like that. He laid out his plan with laser focus. Armed with crossbows, all the soldier had to do was draw the string tight, then pull the trigger and let it fly. He stared at his work and smirked, because the 5th arrow was finally ready, down to the last detail. Raymond the steward stepped in and swore every bit of its development stayed locked down, promising he'd take care of the rest. 2 days later, at the mercenary crew's temporary training grounds, a bright, cheerful voice suddenly called out a morning greeting to their master. Mercenary Vice Schwarzfach snapped around the moment the young master showed up. He wasn't alone. His brother Derek and the maid Eliza tagged along too. Cyrus wrestled with a big object wrapped in cloth, and Derek leaned in to demand what it was. Eliza just stood there, quietly wishing she was the one helping him carry it. As Cyrus the mercenary closed in, he tossed out the reason. He'd brought something for him to inspect, then leaned in with a grin and said he wanted to hear what his brother and even the maid thought too. He tore the covering off with a dramatic flourish, and the weapon he'd designed came into view. Weiss stared, fully hooked by the device. His brother snapped to it right away, a crossbow, but then pointed out its weird, offbeat shape. Cyrus nodded, saying it matched a custom design he'd dreamed up by mashing together a bunch of ideas, while the craftsman took over the nitty-gritty details of how it was built. Cyrus clocked the mercenary's uneasy look, and yup, Weiss already knew the ins and outs of a crossbow, just like he'd predicted, even though the Care Kingdom barely used the thing. With a blazing grin, he leaned in and asked Weiss if she'd fire a shot, because he wanted nothing more than to hear the mercenary's expert take. The mercenary snatched the weapon, and a dead serious focus snapped into his face as he studied how it was built. Then the mechanism clicked shut while he lined up a distant target for the shot. He steadied his hands and took careful aim as the new crossbow's string snapped taut. Cyrus beside him held his breath, eyes locked on a mercenary's intense focus. With a delicate click, the bolt snapped into place, ready to be fired the moment the trigger was pulled. The bolt screamed through the air at insane speed, smashed the wooden target on impact, and the weapon's brutal power left Weiss, Cyrus, utterly stunned for a moment. Shocked by the outcome, he burst into a run right away, charging straight for what was left of his target. He bolted back to Cyrus, snatching him with wide, frantic urgency. The mercenary ripped into him for another crossbow, swearing he'd de-arm his whole mercenary crew with them if he could just get his hands on more. Shocked by the sudden blaze of attention, the boy blurted an apology and insisted this was the only finished prototype, then said he'd been waiting to pitch it to his father right after he heard Weiss's thoughts on how he performed. Still reeling from how brutally powerful that weapon was, the mercenary steadied himself and declared that it could even punch through the Graphonia Empire's toughest iron cavalry armor, their strongest force. Then he leaned in and urged Cyrus to go talk to his father about buying it. Later, Derek's Cyrus' brother cornered him with non-stop pleading, furious that Cyrus wouldn't let him try it, and when Cyrus couldn't take the begging anymore, he finally relented and reluctantly let Derek have his turn. He kept firing that crossbow again and again, locked in like nothing else existed, until Derek's non-stop target practice finally got cut off when it stepped in to stop him. The next day in the Baron Soli's house courtyard, Cyrus faced his parents and their steward, Raymond, and he bowed deeply, thanking them with real sincerity for the precious time they'd given him. He stands in front of his older brother, Derek, grinning with unstoppable excitement, and says that even if it feels sudden, he's got something he desperately wants Derek to see, right now before he trails off. He raises the crossbow and locks eyes with his brother, full of unshakable trust, then he declares he's handing it straight to Derek. In Baron Sally's courtyard, Cyrus grips a strange rifle-like weapon and sights it dead steady, then turns those focused eyes on his older brother, Derek, and tells him he's about to fire a shot straight at him. A sharp click snaps the air, then the weapon roars, blasting its projectile out at terrifying speed. Derek and Raymond just stand there, dumbstruck, watching it rip forward, their faces frozen in pure shock as the sudden discharge lights up everything. The bolt lands dead on target. Cyrus hurls his fist into the air and roars that he nailed the bull's eye, and Derek just stands there, completely stunned, stammering in pure disbelief at what he's seeing. His eyes locked onto the strange weapon, and Dara leaned in, staring at its odd shape and brutal power, asking Cyrus if he'd cooked it up from his books. Cyrus nodded. Yeah, he'd been thinking about whether the right materials could turn into a bow, and then they brought it to Weiss, who tested it and declared it strong enough to wipe out the Graphonia Empire's legendary iron cavalry. Eric's face hardens into a stern reprimand. He blazes, screaming that this is serious business and Cyrus should have run straight to him, his own father, the moment it happened. Cyrus ducks his gaze, guilty as charged, and admits he got scolded. The tension eases as he weighs the consequences, and deep down, Derek realizes this weapon could supercharge their territory, giving even the weak and untrained citizens a real shot. Raymond nods quietly from the side. Then Cyrus, addressed as Takiyasama, lifts his gaze, and determination flares back to life. He steps in and slams the two brothers with a sharp question. Do they know why crossbows don't get used more? He points out the real killer. They're stuck with a brutal reload time, so in sheer firing speed, they'll always lose to longbows. Cyrus and Derek stand shoulder to shoulder, dead serious, and Derek drops the bomb. He's got a proposal to fix the exact problem they're facing. While watching from the back, Cyrus says it's finally time to start preparing for the war that's going to crash into their world in just 1 year. Cyrus lays out their plan in full, urging them to crank out the new weapon at maximum speed to arm their troops, right now. Derek hangs on every word, but all he can think about is their nightmare, the Empire's iron cavalry. He knows that if they hit with everything they've got, their land gets crushed and swallowed in an instant. He keeps talking, saying their current arrows can't punch through the enemy's armor, but this new weapon slices straight through steel like it's nothing, so even a kid like him could bring down an armored knight. Cyrus then snaps out the problem. They only have 400 soldiers, yet if they arm everyone with this, they could flip the whole war. That's why he insists they must hide it, protect the advantage. Derek nods and agrees. His brother Derek stared at the proposal with a grim face. He admitted mass-producing the new weapon would be huge, but warned they'd also have to grow the user base, like training around 10% of the territory's population. He shot back with full confidence that getting about 800 archers wasn't a stretch or a wild guess. To make it happen, he said the archery range wouldn't be locked up for soldiers only, it'd be open to everyone, completely free, so archery could become a fun pastime for the people. And to pull them in even harder, prizes were ready: cash, jewelry, and even swords. Derek snapped his gaze to their mother and begged for her take on Takar's wild proposal. Then Takar jumped in fast, laying out his logic. Everyone would grind to sharpen their skills just to win prizes. The more they practiced, the stronger they'd get, and before long, the territory would be packed with top-tier archers. Brother stayed skeptical, stroking his chin as doubt bubbled out. Would those people really follow this plan? Cyrus just kept watching with a knowing smile. Derek's gut unclenched as the guy told him, "I tried it myself yesterday, it's a blast," and swore that once Derek heard what came next in the proposal, most of his brother's fears would finally vanish. He shot up a finger and started breaking down the whole system, his sixth arrow. Then he laid out the first move: give the target scores, and whoever tops the leaderboard by the end snatches the prize. Then he laid out the next moves. First, they'd host monthly and annual tournaments so everyone could show off their skills. Second, they'd throw in prize money to spark even more players to join. Third, they'd step in as the bookmakers and let people bet on who would win, and every bit of that betting cash would go right back into covering tournament costs and paying out the prizes. He spun to face his father, who'd come right up beside him, and laid out his plan: turn the whole tournament into a full-blown festival, with the territory's citizens as the main stars. That's how it gets wild, he insisted. More energy, more crowds, and even more people lining up to fight or bet. Then he leaned in hard, practically begging for his father's thoughts With fire in his eyes, he swore this brilliant idea would whip the people into a deadly fighting force through entertainment and cold material rewards, and soon he declared the tournament would become House Salicea's signature specialty. He kicked things off by answering Raymond's question about the crossbow's lower firing rate, then hit the point hard. How you use a weapon matters way more than the numbers it's stamped with. He went on to explain this. Sure, one volley might spit out fewer arrows, but they could still pull off the deadly three-row tactic, swap the ranks like gears, with one row firing, one row knocking and preparing, and one row setting arrows. That way, the barrage never breaks, and he was absolutely convinced it would be more than enough to smash through the iron cavalry's charge. To drive his point home, he reminded them that his brother Derek, despite being deadly with a sword, wasn't much of a bowman. Yet after just one day of practice, he was already landing shots on a distant target with a crossbow, and the whole thing was shocking. Then he spun around to face his family, sweeping his arm toward the courtyard beyond, and blurted out the wild question: what if every barony soldier could become that deadly proficient? With a bright, easy grin, he shrugged and admitted he still hadn't told his wife about any of these plans. Then his father's face instantly fell into a grim, dark storm. Cyrus and Derek stood shoulder to shoulder, grinning like they already knew exactly how this was going to go. From where Raymond stood, he leaned in and told his master that the boys seemed to have totally outplayed him. Then the Baroness just drifted into her own thoughts, obsessing over the huge price of all this, and finally chose to act like she never even heard him. For a heartbeat, the Baron went dead silent, eyes sharp, cravat straightened like a warning. Then he snapped, "Raymond," and the steward answered instantly. Then he fired off a string of orders to Raymond: hit the workshop and push for crossbows to be mass-produced, no police in sight, no secret getting out, and make sure the weapons stay quietly in the soldiers' hands. Training starts ASAP, and get an archery range ready too. Raymond nodded and confirmed he got it. Then the Baron faced his sons straight on and ordered them without mercy. Derek was sent to dig up how well the battlefield weapons really performed, with one rule: secrecy at all costs. To Cyrus, the car, he handed the archery range report and a brand new betting system, while the tournament details were dumped onto the staff. And yeah, both boys snapped to it, eager to follow his orders. His father, the Baron, shuts him down with one final command, declaring that the territory will foot every last bill for the whole project. Just before everything gets sealed, Cyrus bursts in, remembering how Commander Weiss had been itching for a new crossbow. Then he pitches his plan to his father, who leans in, intrigued. He lays out his plan. They'd hand Weiss's company the crossbows for free, if they swallow a few hard rules, total secrecy, only using the weapons against monsters in real combat, and sending back detailed reports so they can keep leveling them up. Baron weighs the proposal, and his eyes light up. It's a brilliant idea. Then he grins and says, once Weiss's men get good, they'll train as instructors for his own army too. Derek laughs and teases his little brother for being smart enough to bend his own teacher to his will, saying that's how far his scheming has grown. Cyrus just shrugs it off like it's a compliment, insisting he's always been like this, even as he quietly clocks that his father is there. Then the Baron lays out a brutal, long-held problem. How do you turn ordinary citizens into a real fighting force? He warns that if they march troops off to war, the garrison gets left to stand alone, and that means bandits and monsters will swarm the territory. He grimly recalls how the Iron Cavalry has crushed them again and again, and he insists they must act now, because the next war is coming fast. Derek hears all of it and wastes no time, shouting for everyone there to try out the new weapons. He decides that if the people themselves could be turned into a real fighting force, they'd march into war with their heads held high, territory locked down, their numbers swelling with fresh recruits, while Cyrus just sits there, stunned and impressed by his father's sharp, strategic foresight. That strategic talk instantly turns into a real crossbow test, whole family included, while Raymond takes his turn and fires, shot after shot. The Baroness lights up the moment she nails her target, then practically shoves the next shot at Raymond, and the Baron and Cyrus just stand there, staring, impressed. He relives the whole moment, and realizes the fun of firing those crossbows is a weapon all on its own. If doubts pop up later about the plan, he'll just point to this successful, adrenaline-fueled demo and shut them down. This moment kicked off the road to a near-future legend, where the Solis forces would carve their name into battle, feared across the fields under the banner of *Solis Archery ***. From the moment this brand-new weapon hit the world, people crowned it with one name, Estelbal. To kick off his production, he hauled himself to the workshop in the town of ESD, and the moment he neared the place, the roar of industry poured out, craftsmen shouting for materials. Then one boot hit the wooden porch, and a voice cut through the noise to greet him. Geld, the workshop manager, snapped his head toward the entrance, recognition flashing across his face, and greeted the young master, amazed that the building had grown and the workforce had doubled. Saris, with Derek and another young boy in tow, watched Geld closely and thanked him for coming. He whipped around to his workers and blared that their honored guest had finally arrived. Every craftsman froze mid-work, stood up, and bowed together like one body, then roared their greetings so loud the workshop shook. Cyrus, stunned by the fancy welcome, managed a nervous, half-formed hello back. He snapped back into the moment, looking Geld straight in the eye and talking to the manager as if this was no big deal. No need for all that, he insisted, but Geld only laughed, claiming he could never be that casual. And Cyrus finally laid it out. He was here to ask about the Estelbau and to discuss fresh new designs. The second those words landed, Geld's face tightened with sharp, buzzing interest. Locking onto the manager's intense focus, he pushed ahead and slammed into action with his new project. Then he urgently shouted for a guy named Carl, telling a stunned girl that this was no time to waste and that Carl could handle it in his spare time. He barked that demand, but Cyrus wouldn't let it slide so easily. He snapped that Cyrus' work had to come first, reminding him that every bit of recent prosperity and every new job had sprung from the young master's ideas, same as when they built the water wheel. Cyrus heard it out as his companions all nodded along, fully buying in. Geld steered them away from the main workshop floor, shoved them into a cramped room jammed with tools and lumber, and told them they could talk in private there, while Derek grinned, relieved that no one else was around, because Cyrus had just been asked what wild new creation he wanted to make this time. Without warning, Cyrus slapped a giant sheet of paper onto the workbench and rolled it out wide, while Geld and Carl stared, locked in, because he was about to unveil the blueprint for his brand new invention. The blueprint laid out a tangled web of parallel bars clamped inside a frame, all wired to levers and other parts, and then one of the craftsmen jabbed at a particular section, demanding, "Wait, what exactly am I looking at here?" He leans in and tells Geld the new contraption is a rapid-fire crossbow, and sure, he isn't panicking to finish it today, but he insists they keep pushing the standard crossbows and the Estel bows first. Geld nods hard like he finally gets it. Jabbing a finger at the blueprint, he breaks down the whole mechanism, how a magazine would clamp onto a bundle of arrows, and how yanking the lever back and forth would make the weapon load and fire on its own, while Carl leans in, hanging on every word. He tells them the weapon's name, it's the huge crossbow, and you can see him thinking, yeah, they say it was dreamed up by the legendary strategist Zhuge Liang, but whether that's real history or just a tale people kept passing down doesn't matter anymore. He remembers seeing it in videos from his old life and admits the whole project is mostly for his own obsession, but that doesn't stop him from pushing to build a weapon faster than a bow, even if it won't match a machine gun. Derek leans in, curious, and asks what metal piece he needs to attach so the string can fire. The craftsman is already drowned in thought, and Geld blurts that a curved axis would wobble the moment they fire, so Carl argues for doubling another part. As soon as Geld snaps that they're ready, he demands tools and arrows, and Cyrus scrambles to stop. He fires off a quick reminder. The weapons they were already hired to build come first. Then he leans in and demands they keep this entire new design under lock and key. With their tools already ready, Carl and Gelb grin with steely determination, and they straight up tell Cyrus, "Leave it to us." Cyrus just freezes for a second, stunned by their unstoppable enthusiasm. Later, after he and his brother plus their companion toured the Estalbao production area, Cyrus couldn't help but stare at the progress. Wooden parts were getting ripped out for metal. The job was split between different craftsmen, so it's tougher and built for mass production. And by his estimate, they'll barely scrape together what they need for next year's border war. Relief hit him hard when he heard that, just after his visit, the very first mass-produced bow models were finished, because Weiss had apparently gone straight to his father the very next day after seeing the crossbow, and he locked in the exact supply his mercenary group needed. The mercenaries didn't just run with the Estalbows and report back. They started drilling a brand new 3-row volley tactic, exactly like his father had demanded. In the original history, next year's war was supposed to be a small-scale clash led by 2 marquises, but it still wrecked the Solis barony, costing them 40% of their army. And now something huge has shifted the whole course of history. These changes hit on every front. Estalbows straight-up blunt the enemy's main army, the Iron Cavalry. They also slash the time it takes to train and field way more archers. The 2-headed Falcon mercenaries, led by the invincible General Weiss, have joined their side, and they're backed by a detailed history of exactly how the Care Kingdom's military crumbled. Even with all those perks, Cyrus couldn't shake his dread. He eyed the so-called allies, the Gorman Viscountcy, and felt in his gut they were up to no good, and that dark unease lit a fire in him. He needed a backup car, just in case, to lock in their win. One day, while he and his brother Derek were sitting outside, the older boy clocked Cyrus's troubled face and snapped, "What's wrong?" Cyrus started spilling his worries about his magic, especially his light magic, since it's so rare in the Care Kingdom, and Derek just nodded like, "Yeah, that checks out." What? Cyrus was swamped by his own thoughts, so he clasped his hands and begged his brother to let him speak, while Derek blinked in surprise, then simply nodded like, "Go on." He finally spilled the truth about what was breaking him. His light magic just wasn't working right. Derek's eyes popped open with pure shock as he demanded Cyrus prove it was real. Cyrus nodded and said he wouldn't be so crushed if things were normal, and when Derek realized how serious this was, he urged them to run to their father. Then it hit Cyrus like a light bulb flashing in his head. A brilliant idea hit him like lightning. "This'll work," he burst out. But Derek, the king of pragmatism, cut in fast. They had to meet their father first, and he even sighed that he'd probably get yelled at again. His thoughts sprinted in his head, brimming with fresh confidence, because the killer plan he'd just forged wasn't just dangerous, it was brand new, so slick the enemy would have zero way to stop it. And with it, he was convinced they'd smash the Empire's feared Iron Cavalry, right as the war was about to be officially declared. Baron Solis' past is a chain of brutal omens. In the Care calendar, year 502, the Marquis Gallagherphonia Empire crashed into the Care Kingdom, and while Marquis Hasburg rallied the neighboring nobles to block them, Baron Solis' forces got cut off and lost 40% of their men. They fought back, held the line, and stopped the invasion, but the Imperial troops kept their heads high. Then both sides bragged victory, while the border itself kept the kingdom's blood, leaving the citizens of Estonia mourning. The past doesn't just linger, it crushes the present. Then, on one brutal summer day, a messenger from R.C. Hasselberg suddenly stormed into Estel and cut straight through the household's peace. Hurried out the urgent message, Graphonia Empire was plotting another invasion again, and the orders were brutally simple. Pack the troops at the southern gate fort and wipe out the enemy on the southern plains, while young Solis von Tieker stared in stunned shock, eyes wide as everything suddenly clicked into place. They were headed straight for the southern gate plains, right up against the Demon Realm's battlefield, and the Baron had orders to lead 200 more men than his rank should have ever allowed. The Viscount might have fielded 600, but even without that, this army was big enough to protect their honor, so. Police watched the soldiers march out through the main gate, standing shoulder to shoulder with the rest of his family as they faced the goodbye. The look on his mother's face, so stern, so unshakable, watching them fade away, while he stood there too, silent and locked in, staring at the solemn procession. Taking a breather from his brutal, self-made training, he sits alone and stares into the clock like it's daring him, because he just knows his father and the rest are about to crash onto the battlefield any moment now. Back when he was just 9, he marched up to them with one dream: join the army, and they crushed it, turning him away. His parents' words keep hammering in his head. His father barked that the battlefield was a kid's playground, and his mother softly warned him it wasn't nearly as simple as he'd dreamed. Lynch clenched his fist and swore to himself he wasn't being naive, because he knew exactly how brutal fighting really was, and that's why he refused to stay weak. The thought wouldn't let him breathe. If events played out like the past he remembered, his family's army would get its fighting strength slashed by 40%. But he was done folding. This time would be different. The Solis Baron's army came in with advantages they never had back then. He panicked that his father, the Baron, was way too smug about his plans, figuring the invincible General Weiss's genius would let their elite troops shrug off any setback, and even drilling the generals on the Iron Cavalry's tactics and exactly how to shut them down. His confidence didn't come out of nowhere. It sparked from a brutal overhaul of the Solis Baronese army. They wiped out the old proper archer setup, and suddenly every single soldier, even the cavalry, carried an Estel bow, so deadly and simple that conscripts could swing it with barely any training. Then he piled on cavalry numbers too, dwarfing the earlier history. And that boost only happened because 2 years ago, when grain prices exploded, his father pulled off some sharp, strategic moves. While other territories starved, slaughtering or selling their horses for meat, the Baron struck first, grabbing a huge stash of horses, especially the battle-ready kind, and selling it as a rescue plan to evacuate his citizens. Their numbers exploded. Once under 100, the cavalry surged past 200 once mercenaries rolled in. Those two-headed falcon-hired blades, according to their contract, got first pick on the brand-new warhorses, and that haul was so huge it let more soldiers be reshaped into cavalry. Back at the estate, Cyrus sat alone, gripping a wooden sword like it was his last lifeline, convinced he'd done everything he could, because as a kid, all he could do was hide and wait for good news, and that thought gnawed at him. So he snapped his eyes shut and prayed with everything in him, begging for them to survive this fourth calamity. As he prayed, his mother stood right there, face heavy with grief, watching a single feather drift past like fate, and Cyrus snapped his gaze up, his silent plea still burning, begging them to make it through. She tilted her head to the sky, watched 2 birds wheel through the clouds, and felt the silent prayer finally settle, this try. Derek spotted the southern gate plains by the border, and there, on the far right wing of the Kyre Kingdom's forces, he sat locked in his armor, commander of the Solis Cornell Barony Alliance, as a subordinate snapped his name and called for him. Weiss stepped in and said they'd wrapped up the encampment. Using Earthmage's Baron Cornell lent them. Trenches were carved out, traps were laid, and Derek only gave a quick nod like, good work. Weiss demanded proof about the rumor that the Empire's invasion started because their line of succession was messed up, and Derek snapped back that it was pure desperation, pushed by the First Prince's faction since the prince had no real victories to his name. That's why the First Prince wasn't there at all. Marquis Guy handled everything instead. Derek held his breath as Weiss demanded his take on their odds, then paused before admitting, it wasn't perfect, but that mess had definitely thrown the rest of them into chaos. He kicked off his analysis and pointed out that the enemy's forces were basically the same size as theirs, about 7,000 soldiers apiece. Under Mark, the Graphonia Empire snapped their troops into a crane-wing formation, an aggressive setup meant to wrap around and slam into them before they could react, and while Derek couldn't deny the logic, he could feel how dangerously close this could get. When they pressed Derek for the meaning, he said the enemy wouldn't play by the rules. Marquis Hasseberg, commander of the Care Kingdom's main force, agreed, warning that their attack might not even be aimed at his central army. He broke down the flaw. The Allied commanders had snatched commanding high ground, pinning the enemy's line so it got stretched thin, ripping open massive gaps between their wings, making the formation utterly unreliable. His eyes narrowed with iron certainty. He knew the enemy wanted to rip open those gaps and crush them one piece at a time, starting with a brutal strike on either the left or the right flank. That kind of move would be pure devastation, knock out a wing, then slam through the gap and strike Hasseberg's main army from the sides or even from behind, and if they push hard enough, they could smash the whole formation, choke off every escape route, and trap them completely. Weiss leaned in, hanging on every grim word, because Derek said with a heavy certainty that if it came to pass, it would crush their entire army. But he pressed on because their formation had a deadly flaw. They ringed the enemy in one huge circle, yet since their numbers matched his, everyone got stretched too thin, making it easy for the enemy to smash through their lines and almost impossible for their own allies to back each other up. He snapped his hand toward their right wing, there stood the forces under Viscount Gorman and Viscount Hieronymus. He let out a heavy sigh and told Weiss that everyone's eyeing everyone else, from those disastrous turnips to the trouble with the refugees. Man, they stepped into this whole thing already at each other's throats. He studied their battle map and spotted a nasty problem. The real threat wasn't just the enemy, it was their own allies, something they had to keep an eye on. If the enemy slammed the right wing first, their combined forces would get cut off, trapped, and crushed like easy fodder. Weiss clocked the worst-case play. If those two Viscounts decided to strike back mid-battle, all they'd need to do is slide their defensive line back a little, and bam, the alliance would be trapped with nowhere to run. Derek nodded, admitting this situation was downright dangerous, and he warned that the enemy almost certainly had already figured out a way to weaponize that exact weakness. Their opponent rolled in with their heavy hitter, Marquis and God's Iron Cavalry, fully convinced they could steamroll anyone, and a straight frontal charge at them would have been pure suicide. Smurs snapped across Derek's face, only half the truth. He launched a counter, if they came charging from the front. He told them there was a perfect opening, one move that could flip the whole battle on its head. Then they laid out their own power in full. Baron Cornell's troops were right there, masters of constructs, and all 400 of their soldiers rode out armed with Estel bows, with half that force crashing into battle as cavalry. With their banners snapping in the wind, the full shape of their master plan finally came into focus. Derek slipped in one last vital piece. They'd already set up a hidden ace, with a secret strategy waiting to strike. He kept firing off his plan, pointing out that the enemy's left wing was commanded by the fearless Viscount Silius, and Derek crushed the tension with pure confidence, saying their current moves were already solid, especially because he had a surprise tactic even their own allies wouldn't see coming. Hearing that, a confident smirk stretched across Weiss's face, like he'd already seen the outcome, because he was certain that move would flip the whole battle. We let out a little dismissive scoff, and right away Derek shot us a sharp, questioning look. The mercenary leaned in and said, with full confidence, that naming him Derek's advisor was the obvious right move. Then he boasted that Derek's two sons had pushed for it, and that Takir in particular had been relentless about getting him the job. Derek snapped his head to the side for a beat, taking it all in like it mattered, then he kept moving. Then he glanced back with a knowing grin, flat out, saying it was his plan from the start, and that serving was an honor. With the plan locked in, Weiss snapped her eyes to the horizon, hunting for the enemy's next push, and deep down, she knew the moment for their move was right around the corner. Right on cue, Derek shot his arm up and thundered an order to every troop, get ready to smash into battle. What happened next would later be carved into history as the Southern Gate Annihilation War. At the Graphonia Empire HQ, Marquis God leaned into the shadows with a cocky smirk, watching the enemy like they were already defeated, because the Care Kingdom troops were still standing in the exact formation he predicted, and the way they lost the plot made it clear they didn't even get why his army would hand them the high ground. He scoffed, saying their predictability came from a selfish survival instinct, always grabbing the safety of higher ground, because in his eyes, they can't think past themselves. The horse stamped its hoof and he snapped into action, rolling out the battle plan they'd hammered out. His troops would lock down the center and the right wing, while their left wing surged forward to crush and completely overtake the enemy's right flank. He hoists his sword overhead and roars out his last command, hold the Iron Cavalry back and wait for the opening, then crash into the front lines to smash their target, before he slams the final thunderous order and unleashes the charge. The battlefield turns into a violent storm the moment both armies crash together. Cornell Barony's forces and Viscount Hieronymus' men get ripped into the chaos. Right from the first clash, the commander stays ice calm, eyes sharp as he sizes everything up, says it's going exactly as planned, and orders his troops to get ready for a long-range volley. Vice Schwarzfach, the commander, barks out razor-sharp orders. Every shooter takes aim based on their assigned number. Then everyone holds their fire and locks in together until the signal finally screams, attack. Peeking at the battlefield, he studies their tactics, because the enemy just figured out the Solis-Cornell alliance's right wing is the weak spot, so they'll pile in with archers to pin the center and left, then flood the right flank with overwhelming numbers and rip the rest of the army apart piece by piece. The battle map backs up his read, straight up the enemy plans to smash the two Viscounts' front lines, then roll in their Iron Cavalry to hit the main force from the right. And yep, it's exactly what he predicted. Grimly, he stares reality in the face. On the battlefield, numbers are destiny. More than 2,000 enemy soldiers are zeroed in on the right wing, a crushing force even against the combined troops of Viscount Gorman and Hieronymus, and to make it worse, their morale is hanging by a thread. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Baron Cornell, staring down the chaos spilling across the ramparts. The Baron's eyes hardened as he muttered that the collapse was coming, just a question of when, and Weiss didn't argue. Below, Viscount Hiram's soldiers were getting wiped out in a brutal slaughter, their desperate cries tearing through the air as they screamed that the enemy numbers were insane. Then they demanded to know why no one ordered a retreat, howling that they'd hit their limit. Commander Viscount Hiram could only clench his teeth atop his horse, helpless as the slaughter raged on. From the Graphonia Empire's main headquarters, the whole scene was judged with icy delight as an officer stared at how effortlessly one of the enemy lines had crumpled. Marquis got nodded along as an officer relayed the news. Enemy troops still hadn't even crushed half their forces, and got smirked, clocking how the rest of the enemy line was getting stuck, fighting tooth and nail to hold their ground. Stubbornness was born from Viscount Gorman's army. Gorman himself erupted in rage, hurling curses at Hiram like a cowardly whim had insulted him, and when that resistance slammed down, Marquis roared back with a brutal order. Surround them and crush the stubborn bastards. Marquis Haspard went full-on cautious, then clocked the nightmare coming. At their current pace, the remaining 2,000 soldiers would crush them, so he snapped into action, ordering his troops to hold the line while they pulled back slow and strategic, and to move fast as he told them to rally and whatever came next, stay locked in. The moment the shifting battlefield news hit the Solis Cornell Barony alliance, panic rippled through them. One messenger swore Viscount Hiram's line had shattered to pieces, and Viscount Gorman was pulling back too, while Baron Cornell just stood there, silent and sharp-eyed, weighing every detail. Once the outcome was locked in, Baron Cornell whipped around to Weiss and declared, "All right, time to start." Weiss gave a calm, ready nod, like he'd been waiting for this moment. With his approval locked in, that was all they needed. Elsewhere, a kid with a blonde ponytail stood ready, watching every second, waiting for the last command, the order that would let him fire the signal. History just flipped to a brand new page. Those golden edges gleamed like they were daring the future to show up. Far from the battlefield, in this calm-looking academy, a long-haired young woman and a young man in a formal uniform both stare out the window, their faces locked in serious, deep thought. While all this is unfolding, the architects of the coming chaos steel themselves, and you can see it in every face. Schwarzfox's eyes burn sharp, Marquis Hasberg and the other Marquis look grim and unshakable, and a fourth commander flashes a wild grin as he says, "It's about time." This is where history finally ignites. At the Graphonia Empire's headquarters, Marquis erupted in hearty laughter, praising his commander's brilliance while sneering at the enemy's pathetic inability to keep their nerve, and deciding it was finally time to deliver their last rites. He snapped his gauntlet shut, then roared for the Iron Cavalry. He barks his orders: wipe out the enemy's right wing, smash through from the rear, and bring back the head of the opposing Marquis. Darren, pointing at the battlefield, calls the isolated army on that far right wing their very first target. The plan clicks into place, then the Marquis lets out a savage roar, ordering his forces to wipe them all out. The Iron Cavalry slams into the ground and sends a shockwave tearing through the enemy ranks. Cyrus snaps to attention, realizing the whole fight has flipped in a heartbeat. This isn't training anymore, it's a real battlefield. Around him, his own soldiers spiral into panic, fearing that if the center reinforcements shift, the enemy will crash straight through and reach their Marquis. As the chaos erupted around them, one soldier snapped to their commander, Darren, and begged for orders like their life depended on it. Even with everything happening, he stays silent, just stone still. Right nearby, a dark-haired commander with glasses watches the chaos unfold with a calm, unreadable face, while his troops hang back, jittery and desperate for what comes next. Others freeze in fear, and Cyrus surges ahead, remembering his father standing exactly right here 1,000 times. He snaps into command, shouting for everyone to double-check their arrows and get ready for a brutal volley. Then he issues one hard rule. They don't fire until they hear the command hits the air, and everyone roars, yes. As the archers snap their bows back, Cyrus stares down the enemy pushing forward, because the signal is coming any second now. Right when he's about to shout the order, his eyes snap to a lone figure on the nearby ridge, Derek. The soldiers around him freeze, their stomachs dropping as they spot Cyrus in total shock, stunned that his brother is here, and fully realizing this situation is way too deadly to touch. From where Derek stands, he fires up his troops with a sharp command. When he signals, they lock onto the front of the enemy lines and aim to break through. He froze on the battlefield, heart slamming like a drum in his ears, while everyone stared, like the silence swallowed the whole chaos whole. Cyrus, the younger brother, spoke with steady confidence, telling Derek to chill, and reminding him they'd already decided they were going to win. Even with the reassurance, Derek's gauntlet hands snapped into a tight fist, and the truth hit him hard. He was terrified. That terror didn't break him. Sparks of resolve lit up inside him. A shaky, determined smile flickered across his lips as fear snapped into pure purpose. He shot his hand up to signal, and as Cyrus watched, Derek's eyes hardened. He'd already made up his mind. At that exact moment, Cyrus' voice sliced through the chaos, barking for him to go after the second objective on the right now. Derek roared his confirmation, crushing every last shred of doubt as he pushed forward, telling himself he would believe. He'd trust himself, and he'd stand by his little brother like his own heartbeat. Memory snaps and drags him back months before the war even started. Back then, a younger Derek snapped with bitter rage, complaining that his light power couldn't actually hurt a soul. All it could do was blind someone for a split second. He unloaded his frustration on Cyrus, wishing desperately that he could wield something deadly like fire or lightning, not these pathetic, cheap tricks. As a swordsman, it gnawed at his pride to rely on light spells, calling his own power totally useless. Cyrus just listened in silence, eyes locked on him with a thoughtful look as his brother's words hit hard. He cornered his brother and demanded, "What do you mean by throw light?" Derek moped through his explanation, grimly admitting it was all he could do, then agreed to show him. He thrust his hand forward, and a glowing orb of light popped into existence above his palm. The light blasted across his face, and his eyes went wide with pure wonder. He swore it was amazing, and Derek just stared, totally baffled, stammering that it only made a little light. Cyrus' brother's simple explanation did nothing to cool his excitement. He practically burst out that Derek was sitting on an incredible magic skill. Before Derek could even process it, Cyrus yanked him along, dragging him to their father to spill what they'd just discovered. The very next day, their talk picked back up at the training grounds on the edge of EST. Then someone cut in with a calm, clear voice. "I see." Cyrus couldn't wait. He begged Derek to show off his skills in front of his master, Weiss. Derek hesitated, then gave in and agreed. Right before he cast the spell again, he clocked Cyrus's raw excitement, and it hit him. Teaming up with a master like Weiss could turn his basic light magic into something way more wild. So he gripped the moment and summoned the light once more. As the glowing orb hung in the air, he leaned in and fired off a tactical question to Derek. What would happen if that light locked onto a pack of galloping horses? A sharp question lingered in the air, and Weiss just smirked like she already knew, while Derek processed the meaning, realization lighting up his face as he blurted out whether Cyrus was really hinting at using this on a battlefield. With a confident grin, he confirmed his brother's hunch and laid out the nightmare it would unleash. If a cavalry charge at full gallop suddenly wiped out their sight, the chaos and destruction would be beyond belief. "Yeah," he said, and then he drove the point home. This revelation hit Derek like a lightning strike. Suddenly, Cyrus' whole way of thinking made sense. His light magic wasn't just useful, it was meant to smash through the battlefield. That's when the real training kicked off. Derek learned to hurl his light farther and nail every shot with sharper precision, all while Weiss kept a close eye on him. Watchful, yes, but with a hint of amused bemusement. Mages are priceless for one brutal reason. They're rare, so rare that both the kingdom and the empire can count them on their fingers. And the few that do exist usually come from noble bloodlines and refuse to march on the front lines. So commanders don't build plans to stop magic at all, and that's why magic users hit the battlefield like an unseen storm wrecking strategy before anyone can react. He swallowed that logic with a grimace, then spun toward his younger brother, Derek, asking if this was the real heart of the plan, because the same principle would hit even harder for his own unbelievably rare light magic. Then the memory snaps to a whole new moment, another conversation, and his father's voice cuts through everything with one hard, unshakable line. He wasn't allowed to join the military. In that moment, a younger Derek stood in front of his parents with his arms flung wide, staring them down in pure disbelief, and then he demanded, out loud, why they'd shut him down. His father calmly met them and said, "Yeah, the day you'll finally step onto the battlefield is coming, but right now is not the time, you're way too early." Cyrus couldn't hold it in. He burst in mid-conversation, insisting he'd already explained how Derek's light magic could shred the Empire's iron cavalry. Then Derek, stunned by his brother's outburst, tried to shut Cyrus up. Right then, their mother dropped to her knees in front of Derek, gripping his hands tight as she begged him. He was only 12, and she couldn't stand the idea of him heading into a place that deadly. Her heartbreaking plea left Cyrus completely frozen. He could only stare, choking out a whisper of the word. But the father didn't budge. He called his wife, Karisu, right by name and cut it off, warning that giving in to a child's stubbornness would only spark bigger trouble. That last line snapped Cyrus right past his breaking point. He exploded, roaring at the top of his lungs that his father was wrong, and the whole room went silent in shock. That outburst still hangs in the air, but now everything locks onto Derek's buried feelings. He remembers how it all started, just raw jealousy of his younger brother, like envy was all he had to cure. Rage and disbelief hit him hard, because no matter what he did, the older brother in him always came last, while the Kier got the praise like it was fate, and the whole world seemed to revolve around it. That uneasy feeling twisted into something else. Then, the moment he started staring at his brother more closely, he caught Tacker struggling to eat right, burning the midnight oil over books, and wiping sweat off his brow after every brutal try. Derek finally understood. His brother was fighting like hell. He couldn't stop thinking about what his brother was chasing so fiercely, and why it mattered that much. Then he peeked from behind the doorway, saw him studying, and his envy finally turned into real questions. That question kept pounding in his head, crashing into him with brutal frustration. Then the tears started to pour as he slumped against the doorframe, trapped in a fight with feelings he couldn't untangle. That same crushing frustration now ignites him in the present. Standing before his family, he declares his urge to join the fight isn't just stubbornness or showmanship. He's got a purpose, too. He shoves past his doubts and fires off the words with raw, desperate conviction. His voice booms through the air, carrying the raw desire that pain carved into him, and when that beloved family image crashes into his thoughts, he vows he'll protect them all too. Then lightning-bright light explodes from his outstretched hand. The declaration detonates in a blinding flash that swallows the battlefield whole. Weiss, Marquis Hasberg, and their allies get hit with it so hard they freeze, throwing up their arms to shield their eyes as shock and confusion rip through their cries. Blinding flash detonates across the battlefield, shattering the enemy formation into total panic. Soldiers shriek as they're flung from rearing, terrified horses, and just like that, the whole advance slams to a violent, chaotic stop. That blinding flash of light tore straight through the enemy cavalry, shattering their formation, until one of the charging soldiers, stunned for a heartbeat, stumbled back and snapped, demanding to know where that sudden, overwhelming brilliance came from. Sudden blindness hit like a nightmare. He couldn't see the ground, so he and his mount crashed straight into a hidden trench, and the charge shattered on impact. Schwarzbach watched the chaos from afar and knew this plan would work. Those little bumps and shallow trenches are harmless in clear sight, but once a rider gets blinded, they turn into a brutal wall no one can dodge. Derek's plan hit like a strike. Down in the field, he stood surrounded by the soldiers he'd just pulled out, their cheers roaring around him as they shouted that they were alive, gawked at the enemy's iron cavalry crashing down one after another, and praised him to the skies by name. The report shot straight to Marquis Hasper's command. Then a rider thundered up, gasping that the iron cavalry had been halted, and that Baron Solis had likely planned for this exact move. The Marquis listened in silence, a sly, thoughtful smile tugging at his face as he took in the wild twist that just happened. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Viscount Hiramy kept his eyes locked on everything, silent as stone, his face giving nothing away. In Marquis God's camp, the news didn't land quietly, it detonated. A soldier blurted that a third of their iron cavalry, their deadliest force, had been knocked out. Rage flared in the Marquis's face as he clenched his fist, swore it couldn't be true, and roared at the messenger to stop the lines. Rage burned in his chest, but Cyrus didn't hear a thing. He just watched from a distance as Derek's accomplishment played out, eyes blazing with proud respect while he praised him. "You did very well." Derek didn't care a bit about his brother's approval. His eyes locked onto his mentor, Weiss Schwarzbach. He stammered and reached for his master's validation, but Weiss only looked back and called him out by name. He steps forward, armored boots thumping softly as he gives the boy a nod. Simple, but it says everything. Great work. Then he whips his eyes to the last pockets of enemy troops and orders Derek to cut the rest loose. Derek glances up at his master and realizes they've still got about 2/3 of the enemy left to deal with. No time to waste. He has to reveal their next move right now, setting the crew up for brutal long-range suppressive fire. Stand your ground no matter what. His fists clench tight, like fate is already pulling the trigger. This is Derek, the oldest son of the Baron Solis, a kid born to become a sword saint one day, the legendary swordsman of life. His very first battle erupts with that blazing flash of light, one move that sparks pure rage, shames the Empire's troops, and leaves them hurt without landing a single real fight. Down on the field, Cyrus stares up with a satisfied calm, knowing he's done all he can, and his mind turns inward as he silently vows to carry on for Kar.